Yeah, sure. He sent me a link just from to say, okay, now click on the link. I click on the link. And he said, okay, now do me a favor. And what do you see? I say, okay, well, it says for me to log into my Chase. He said, okay, now do me a favor and log into your Chase with that link that I literally just sent. I freeze up and I say, um, what is your name one more time? He says, my name is Gregory and my extension number is 2230001. I'm like, okay. And he said, yeah. And how are you doing on this fine evening? Beep. Hung up on his ass and automatically knew it was a scam. So y'all got to be very careful for a lot of these bank scams. Just to sum it up, Chase basically became a victim of cybersecurity scams and all types of crazy stuff. Chase is one of the biggest banks in America. And they unfortunately went through a crazy ass glitch. Now, instead of most of us ignoring the glitch because banks go through this all the time, a lot of TikTok influencers stopped to warn a lot of their followers, and people ran to Instagram to tell their followers and acquaintances to quickly take advantage because Chase is basically giving out free money in these hard times. People saw this as an opportunity to eat the rich and to say F the rich. But of course, it backfired.
To this shit, man. What the f, bro? Bro told me tap in, bro. Bro said he got the job a day before this shit happened. Bro was like, yo, 50 tap in. I'ma hook you up. I'm like, I bet this is my only shit, bro. My only motherfucking account, bro. And they gonna whack this shit. Bro.
Now, I don't know if that video is real, but what I will say is a lot of people on Twitter were posting their bank statements and showing that Chase gave everybody a negative balance if you tried to participate in this Chase fraud. So if you thought that you was really going to deposit a fake check worth $700,000 and then withdraw 20K really quickly, you probably got away. But best believe that these banks are coming for their fucking money. Considering Chase fixed this issue, Chase wasn't giving up without a fight. So according to payments.com, it was reported by Chase that this is basically the gist of everything. The glitch became a TikTok craze and lasted a few days, during which time thousands of people exploited the error by depositing bad checks and withdrawing money from ATMs, according to the report, citing an estimate by the bank. As with any fraud-related issue, according to Chase, we review internally and refer to law enforcement as appropriate. A Chase spokesperson also said, regardless of what you see online, depositing a fraudulent check and withdrawing the funds from your account is fraud, plain and simple. Now, according to payments.com, Chase plans to freeze accounts in which it thinks people have committed fraud, and they also will be sharing surveillance footage and other information about those who allegedly committed fraud with authorities. When the glitch did happen, however, TikTok did add a little disclaimer, making it very clear, and I quote, participating in this activity could result in you or others getting hurt. So TikTok did have to step in.
If you're one of the people that tried the Chase Bank glitch, leave the country now. You're in so much trouble. People all around the world are lined up around Chase banks to try and do this quote-unquote glitch. But it's not a glitch. I'll tell you what it is. What people are actually doing is depositing fake checks, then cashing out on the ATM before Chase realizes it's a bad check.
Former bank manager here. I have some unfortunate news for you. If you thought that a company like Chase Bank would not come after you for even $200, you can't even fathom how much they're going to rain on you for anything, especially when you understand who is actually the people behind the balances that Chase Bank has. To put it into perspective, Chase Bank holds more balances than some small countries. If you think that this is a company, remember, this is FDIC insured, so basically, up to a certain point, you're stealing from the US of A. If you think that they're not going to use that power and the technology that comes with it to come after you, and everything, people that may be even close to you are going to feel the slap that's going to come your way. And I'm so sorry that you made these poor choices. Whoever told you this was a good idea, go to their house and slap the fuck out of them, because you done fucked up your life. Go take that money back. Tell them you don't know how this happened, that somebody told you that to go do this, that it wasn't your idea. give them their fucking money, and maybe they'll leave you alone. Maybe. No guarantees.
People don't realize
Can you
that a lot
guys
of
hear
these
me?
banks, they're not like grocery stores. They're not like these small little chain restaurants that you can just scam or play or screw over and then get away with it. A lot of these banks are federally protected. So when you come for a
Hello.
federally protected company,
I'm just wondering if you
they're
can hear
going to
me.
throw the book at you. A lot of these people are now gonna get their bank accounts closed, get their bank accounts frozen, and then a lot of this shit is going to be thrown into collections after they eventually close your bank account. And guess what? When
Hello? Okay, so you can hear me. Not very loudly, but it's okay. Mm.
they throw the amount of money you owe in collections, they're then going to go out of their way to make sure they sue you and come for that money if you don't pay them that money accordingly. And if you decide to leave that money in collections and never pay them that money and think that you're going to get away with it, then they are then going to go out of their way and probably file a crazy ass lawsuit against you. The IRS will then be coming for you as well. There has been a rise in scamming, shoplifting, boosting, and so much more ever since the pandemic. People are too scared to find a side hustle, start a business, get a second and third job, and people want to just get fast, instant money. This generation is so slow because this has been happening for years. This has been a thing since the 90s. People have been writing fake fraudulent checks that they hope will not bounce and then they can withdraw the money in time. People keep forgetting that these banks have cameras at the ATMs. They see you withdrawing the money. They see who's withdrawing, they see who's taking this money, and people don't want to put two and two together. So let me just say that whoever is involved in these fraudulent scams and involved in these fraudulent things, I hope you know that you deserve to get your ass whooped and you're probably going to be in jail for a long time. Stuff like this isn't a joke. If you're watching this and you see anybody around you scamming, do not participate. These scams are out of control in Atlanta, New York City, and in California. This will eventually come biting you in the ass. You're always going to be looking over your shoulder, paranoid, and think everyone's out to get you because you're eventually going to be waiting for your karma to come and collect because you cannot do stuff like that.
4 of 5 people accused in a check cashing scheme are now in custody. Police say that the suspects cashed almost $23,000 worth of checks from the Propel Schools Foundation. Each check had a forged signature of the Propel Schools co-founder.
Cops say that they have arrested the teen who was caught on camera, they say, withdrawing money from ATMs using counterfeit debit cards. They say he's part of a skimming scam and his day job may have helped.
A teenager now under arrest. Miami Beach police say 19-year-old Manuel Vargas played a major role in a criminal scheme using ATM skimmers to steal thousands of dollars from countless victims. Investigators believe Vargas is one of 3 crooks who was last seen in May entering his victims' PIN numbers at various ATMs across Miami-Dade and Broward counties. Miami Beach detectives say the trio placed a sophisticated skimmer over a standalone ATM inside Mount Sinai Medical Center. When placed over the card reader, the electronic device looks pretty real, making it nearly impossible for customers to detect that it's there.
Later, the subjects will go retrieve it and then fraudulently create new debit cards to use.
And that's exactly what happened to a Miami Beach man. He asked us not to identify him, but back in August, he told us about how he was taken for $800.
I didn't know about it until the following morning. And 400 of it was taken right from the ATM machine on the 7-Eleven.
Tonight, Vargas is facing more than a dozen counts of fraud, while his 2 partners in crime remain on the run.
You see these body cam videos going viral on Twitter and on YouTube all the time of these people who try to write fake and faulty checks, and they get away with it. But then eventually, what's going to happen when you get that money? You're going to blow the whole thing because you got it so fast, and you're going to be so eager to spend every single penny. And then eventually it's going to catch up with you and people are going to find out that you yourself are scamming. And when you scam people, people do not take shit like that lightly. So I'm really glad that Chase is knuckling down on these people and that these people have an example made out of them. Do not scam people. It will always come back because karma is so real when you try to go out of your way to fuck people over. You go around trying to fuck people over, somebody might kill you or somebody might press charges against you and have you reprehended and put in jail. Scams have been on the rise, and there's even videos on YouTube of people teaching you how to scam, teaching you how to finesse, and teaching you how to get your way. Because we live in a microwave society where people want to get things instantly, quick, and fast.
Everybody out here gotta get that cheese, bro. You feel me? It's 2024. You gotta learn how to scam and make you some money, nigga. You don't want to work and not working, make you some money, nigga.
Wow.
Do something at the crib that's provided for you, not laying down eating Wingstop all day, watching the show. Make you some money, nigga. Do something, nigga. Get you some money. Help your girlfriend, help your baby mom, help your mother. Do something for yourself, my nigga. You feel me? Do that.
Nobody wants to go to college. A lot of people don't want to work a 9 to 5. Nobody wants to start at the bottom. And that's the problem. I always have respect for people who work low-end jobs and minimum wage jobs because someone has to do it. And when I see people working these low minimum wage jobs, even if they're at an age where they should probably be doing something else, I always have respect for them because they could be doing so many other things. They could be selling their pum pum on the streets.
But
they could
they're
be
not.
doing drugs and selling drugs. They could be scamming people, robbing people, and so much more. And I always respect people who work these low-end jobs because I've worked these low-end jobs. When I was young, short on cash, living paycheck to paycheck, didn't know what I was going to do, I still knew that I'd rather work an honest living rather than trying to finesse and play people. Apply at Payless. Go apply at Papa John's. Go apply at Walmart. Go apply at so many other places that are hiring. McDonald's will hire anybody that's willing to work. If you're struggling and you're low on cash, get a second job, utilize your skills, learn a trade skill, get into construction. There's so many ways to get paid that so many people are so impatient. If you feel like you can't live on your own, get a roommate, get a second, get a third, get a fourth roommate, or go back home living with your parents temporarily until you get back on your feet. This notion of trying to live the fast life and trying to keep up with all these influencers, a lot of y'all don't realize a lot of these influencers and these big name entertainers, a lot of them are in excruciating credit card debt, Klarma, Afterpay. A lot of people are in excruciating $50,000, $80,000, $20,000 credit card debt to try to fund their lifestyle to look good on Instagram, to try to fund their traveling. A lot of these people aren't saving their coins. A lot of these people are running through their money, running through their tax dollars, and then they wonder why. Then you wonder why they're struggling and why they're down bad. Hello, a lot of these people spend so much time scamming, hustling people, making all this fast money to make themselves look good on social media to attract their ideal partner or to attract women and attract hoes, and then it caught up with them. That's a good example. You know, these bank scams have been around forever, and it's a shame that these people keep falling for it and keep trying to go on that path. You remember that scam from back in 2013, 2014, people were waving cash, saying, hey, y'all, if you want to turn 15 cents into $1,500, make sure y'all hit my Cash App and text this number right now and text this phone number and text this person. Let them know what you think. I also want to tell y'all real quick that if you ever see anybody on social media posting money to their ear or waving cash or being like, look at all this money, fast life, fast this, do not give into it because more than likely they're just doing that to attract clients. So people could be like, oh, how'd you make all that money? And then they can attract you and they can get you onto their business venture, or they're trying to flex for the women that they're trying to attract or impress the men that they want the validation from. Understand that Jay-Z once said, you're on the gram holding money to your ear. There's a disconnect. We don't call that money over here. Why do you have that wad of cash that you're flexing on the gram and not putting it in a bank account, a savings account, a high yield savings account, or putting it in a stock or a cryptocurrency? Why is that money just sitting there? That's irresponsible and that's childish. I'm telling y'all, the only people that do that shit is rappers and scammers. I'm telling y'all, anyone who shows you a whole bunch of money, if they're not using it for anything art related or entertainment related, or they're not a rapper, do not believe these people who are showing you money on their social media because, again, that's not what money looks like. That's not what real money looks like, to say the least. Those are all scams. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is true because the universe will reward you. God will reward you if you literally put forth effort to live a good life and make good choices. If you're going out of your way to literally try to hustle and finesse people, you need to remember Everything comes with a price. Yeah, you got those nice clothes and those nice shoes, but does that really make you happy? The fact that you gotta hide how you got that money, the fact that you gotta pretend that you don't know how you accumulated this income, does that really make you happy? Karma is real. You never shit on people because you will get your day. But after this video, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe. Please be sure to be careful with a lot of these scams, and please watch out and don't.
About a rugged 86-year-old man who decides to head off into the wilderness to try to do. Today's story is about a rugged 86-year-old man who decides to head off into the wilderness to try to do something that nobody else before him had ever been able to do. In fact, some had even died trying. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So, if that's of interest to you, please sneak into the like button's house and replace all of their baby carrots with regular-sized carrots. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. On an early morning in August of 1931, an 86-year-old man carrying a massive backpack limped into a supply store in the tiny town of Alvin, British Columbia, Canada. This man's name was Robert Brown, but everyone knew him as Volcanic, because decades earlier he had discovered a gold mine in Volcanic City, Canada. Volcanic had actually made his living as a gold prospector, and he had been so good at it that he had been able to retire early. And so these days, as an 86-year-old man, he pretty much got to do whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. And so inside of this supply store, the young man at the cash register smiled at Volcanic and offered to let him keep his backpack at the front of the store while Volcanic shopped. And Volcanic kind of scowled back at him. I mean, he took offense to this. He knew how he must look to this clerk. I mean, Volcanic was old, short, super skinny, and he dragged his left foot when he walked. And so he figured, this kid must think he's weak. And Volcanic hated that. He did not think he was weak. And so he said to the guy, "No, I can carry my bag myself, thank you very much." Then, to show the clerk there was more to him than met the eye, Volcanic flashed this big grin, revealing this gaudy, enormous set of gold teeth that he had bought when he had struck it rich in Volcanic City. And after seeing these ridiculous gold teeth, the clerk looked very taken aback, which was exactly what Volcanic wanted. Satisfied, Volcanic limped past the cash register and the clerk towards the back of the store, where he picked up some cooking supplies, ammo for his shotgun, and a pen to write in his journal. And then he took everything up front to check out. Volcanic watched as the clerk furrowed his brow as he rang up the items, clearly trying to make sense of what Volcanic was up to. He asked Volcanic if he was going camping by the Pit River that ran through town. But Volcanic said no. He was going to the Pit River first, but he was going to hike all the way along the Pit River, go through the mountains to another body of water called Stave Lake. And before the clerk could ask any questions, Volcanic said he was going there because there was a hidden gold mine he was going to explore. And at this, Volcanic watched with delight as the clerk's eyes got wide. Volcanic knew most people, especially in this area, thought this gold mine was a total myth. And sure enough, when the clerk recovered from his surprise, he said to Volcanic, hey, you really ought to reconsider going there. The clerk said he had seen plenty of people come through his shop on the way out to go try to find this mine, but nobody ever came back saying they had found it. In fact, he said that some of these people didn't come back at all. At least 2 people had died because the hike to Stave Lake was miles and miles through extremely dangerous terrain. Volcanic waited until the clerk was done lecturing him, and then he leaned over the counter and he whispered to the kid that he was different. He had a secret that would allow him and only him to find that mine successfully. And when he did, he would come back to the store and he would lay the gold down right on the counter just to prove it to him. Then Volcanic left a handful of cash on the counter, he gathered up his supplies, flashed one more gold-toothed smile, and then made his way out the door. A few hours later, Volcanic hiked uphill along the rocky banks of the Pit River. He'd only covered about 5 miles so far, because after all, he was 86 with a bum left foot, and so he moved pretty slowly these days. But even still, only 5 miles into the journey, he already felt totally cut off from civilization. The Pitt River was about 1,000 feet across, and it was surrounded on either side by a thick forest. Volcanic was hiking parallel with the river, with the water on his right and the trees on his left. It was a stark and isolated setting that would make most people feel small and vulnerable. But after so many years working as a gold prospector, Volcanic was very accustomed to being out in the wilderness all by himself, so this felt normal. Now, of course, decades had passed since the last time Volcanic was a gold prospector, but even now, at his old age, he still felt like he was the skilled outdoorsman he once was. Volcanic kept on hiking uphill, staying close to the shore's edge, until the sun began to set. And by that point, the trees on the left had begun to thin out, and Volcanic was finally able to see kind of far out beyond in the direction he was going. And he saw off in the distance there were all these mountains. And as soon as he could see these mountains, he pulled out his journal and he flipped to the last page, and he studied the page, and then looked at the mountains, and he smiled. It was going to take weeks to reach the gold mine, but he knew he was going the right way. Because on that last page of his journal was a map. This map was the secret that Volcanic had told the store clerk about. It was the thing that was going to allow Volcanic to reach that gold mine where so many others had not. Volcanic had actually drawn the map himself several years ago. Back then, he'd been panning for gold in northern British Columbia when he had run into this indigenous woman in the forest. And this woman was deathly ill, and so out of the kindness of his heart, Volcanic had given this woman some healing herbs and then stayed with her for days until she was nursed back to health. And this woman had been so grateful to Volcanic that she had told him a secret. She told him that the legendary gold mine out near Stave Lake was absolutely real. And she said she knew this because her father was friends with the guy who discovered it. The man's name was Slumac. And she said he would go into the wilderness for days at a time, and then when he came back home, he'd come bearing these huge gold nuggets as big as chicken eggs. And not only did this woman tell Volcanic about this mine, she gave him directions to it. And so as she did, Volcanic took notes in his journal and then used those directions to construct the map. However, before Volcanic parted ways with this woman, she gave him a warning. Right before he died, she said Slumac put a curse on the mine. And so now, if anybody tried to reach the mine, the forest itself would stop them.
Well, that's a good sign for me not to go.
Before I became a professional, strange, dark, and mysterious storyteller, I served in the military. And during my time in the military, I had some pretty wild experiences. But what I remember most about my time in service was not my own stories, but rather the stories I heard from other service members. Keep in mind, service members are sent to some of the most isolated and treacherous places in the world that very few people go to. And so some of the stories that come out of those places are totally creepy and weird. And even more than that, a lot of these stories sort of stay in-house. They stay in the military just because it's kind of a cultural thing. You know, people don't necessarily want to go out and tell the world about the totally unsettling and inexplicable thing they saw while they were deployed. It's like people might think they were crazy, but there's lots of stories like that. And so if hearing some of those crazy military stories appeals to you, well, boy, do I have a podcast for you. It's called Wartime Stories, and it's hosted by Luke Lamanna, who himself is a veteran. He was a reconnaissance Marine, which I can tell you is kind of a big deal. And so because he has access and placement, he's been able to extract some of these stories from the military, and he shares them on the show. And if you wanted to kind of generalize the types of stories you're going to hear on this podcast, it's like the strange, dark, and mysterious meets the battlefield and beyond. The Wartime Stories podcast is free, and it's available on any podcast platform. So all you have to do is, go to your favorite platform and look.
All right. Anyway, next. I hate commercials.
And so now, standing in a clearing beside the Pitt River, Volcanic thought back to that warning. He wasn't afraid of what she said, but just to be safe, he figured he would spend as little time as possible in the forest, and any time he needed to pitch his tent along this journey to the mine, he would do so as far away from the tree line as he could. This was actually Volcanic's second attempt at trying to reach this gold mine. 5 years earlier, he had attempted this exact same hike. On that attempt, despite Volcanic reaching the shores of Stave Lake, which apparently was right near the entrance to this gold mine, he had to stop because he got a severe case of frostbite on his left foot. That frostbite had caused 3 of his toes to die and rot, and so Volcanic had to amputate all 3 of them with his pocket knife right there out in the wild. No anesthetic, nothing. And so this is why Volcanic had to turn around on that attempt. and it's why he now walked with a limp. And Volcanic had to admit that the fact that he had been forced to literally cut off his own toes did make it seem like he had become a victim of Slumac's curse. But he also knew that it didn't take a curse to make the Canadian wilderness dangerous. He just should have worn thicker socks. Just then, Volcanic heard a twig snap somewhere outside of his campsite in the darkness. And so instinctively, he shot up, he grabbed a shotgun, and he turned towards the sound, half expecting a bear to come charging out of the woods. But after standing there for several minutes, nothing came out of the forest, and eventually all Volcanic could hear was the gentle sound of his fire and the river. The forest was totally still. As his heartbeat slowed down, Volcanic told himself that, the sound he heard must have just been a rabbit running through the forest, nothing to worry about. And so he lowered his gun and steadied his breathing, and he looked at his fire and he gave half a thought to just leaving his campfire burning, just in case he heard something else, he'd have some light to go out and see what it was. But he thought he was being kind of paranoid, and so he grabbed some water and put out the fire, engulfing him in darkness, and then he climbed into his tent and fell asleep. The next morning, Volcanic got up at sunrise, packed up his tent and his camping gear, and then hiked all day long. And he did this day in and day out, dragging his left foot behind him for over a month. Volcanic knew he was moving much slower than a younger, healthier man would. Some days, he could barely travel a mile before feeling so exhausted that he would have to stop. But despite becoming skinnier and more ragged by the day, Volcanic kept on hiking. And eventually, after going all the way down the Pitt River and crossing through the mountains, he finally arrived at the shore of Stave Lake, the same place he'd been when he'd had to amputate his own toes. But this time, he was able to keep on going. Volcanic hiked all the way to the opposite side of Stave Lake, and he came to a stop to take in the view. Surrounding the lake were all these huge rolling mountains, and in one spot, Volcanic noticed the mountains dipped down and formed a natural bowl in the earth that was filled with this gorgeous bluish-white ice. Now, even though Volcanic had never been to this place before, he knew instinctively that that had to be Stave Glacier. And this glacier meant everything to Volcanic because it was the last major landmark on his map on the way to this mine. According to his map, the entrance to the gold mine was located on the side of a mountain not far from the glacier. Now, Volcanic wanted to keep pushing forward and trying to get to this entrance as soon as possible. He was excited. But the sun was starting to go down, and he knew if he kept on going at night, the risk of injury was quite high. He could slip and fall. And remember, it had taken Volcanic over a month to hike into this location. He is way away from civilization. And so if he gets hurt, nobody's coming to help him. And so he decided he would stop and make camp that night. He pitched his tent well away from the tree line, he ate some beef jerky and biscuits, and then he crawled into his sleeping bag to try to go to sleep. But he couldn't. He was too excited about this mine. He was so close. And so he laid there restlessly for hours, listening to the sound of the wind pick up outside. Now, normally, the sound of the wind would help Volcanic fall asleep. But tonight, it was not helping. It was actually making him feel really uneasy. The wind was loud and fast, howling across the lake. And that's when Volcanic noticed that despite all the noise outside, when he looked at the fabric of his tent, it wasn't moving with the wind. It was totally stationary. And so Volcanic sat up and he opened up the flap of his tent and looked outside. And the second he did, it got even louder, the howling wind. But he couldn't feel any wind blowing. And so he struck a match and he held it out in front of his tent, and the flame didn't even flicker, again, despite all this crazy howling sounds. And that's when he realized there was no wind. And so feeling totally unsettled, Volcanic closed the flap of his tent, got back in his sleeping bag, clutching his gun, listening to this horrifying sound outside that he couldn't make any sense of. And then by the morning, when the sun came up, the sound just went away. By this point, Volcanic was so anxious just to leave and go to this mine that he didn't eat any breakfast. He just grabbed his journal, tore the map out of the last page, tucked it in his back pocket, and he started hiking. He still felt very uneasy about the phantom wind he had heard all night long, but now his sole focus was on this mine. He knew that if he could find it, he would not only have infinite riches, but he would also go down in history as like the greatest gold prospector ever. And on top of that, on the way back out again, he could stop at that supply store and drop some gold on the counter and rub it in that clerk's face, just like he said he would. Volcanic made his way first towards the glacier and then up the side of a mountain. He dodged tree limbs and climbed over boulders, all the while dragging his left foot on the ground. And then finally, up ahead, he saw this dark hole on the side of a mountain, and it looked like the entrance to a cave. Now, Volcanic could not see very far into that cave, but he was certain the gold mine had to be inside of there. And so with a rush of excitement, he made his way up to the dark entryway and he stepped inside. 2 months later, on November 2nd, 1931, that store clerk back in Alvin looked out the front window of his store and watched the snow begin to fall. A blizzard was coming in, and all this clerk could think about was that strange old man with the gold teeth who had wandered off into the wilderness 3 months earlier. Now, the old man had told the clerk that he would stop by the store on his way out to prove he had found the gold. However, the man had not returned. And so the clerk wasn't sure if that was because, he was too embarrassed because he hadn't found the mine, or if maybe he had gotten stuck out in the wilderness. But either way, the clerk just had a bad feeling that, something bad could have happened to that guy. And so just to play it safe, the clerk grabbed his jacket, he left the store, and he went to go find the local game warden to tell him what was going on. 3 weeks later, that same game warden trudged through knee-high snow at the edge of Stave Lake. Even though he and his search party were much younger and healthier than Volcanic, it had still taken them weeks to arrive here, mostly because of the blizzard. But in all the time it took hiking to this location, they had not found a single trace of Volcanic. The warden was beginning to wonder if this was pointless, if they should just turn around and head back. And that's when he looked up and he noticed the glacier on the far end of the lake. And in the snow near that glacier was this little pop of color. The warden pointed it out to his men, and they all began running towards it. And as they got closer, they realized what this thing was a tent that had collapsed under the snow. And then once they actually reached the tent, they shoveled off all the snow and sort of popped it back up, and they looked inside. But Volcanic was not in there. Instead, they found an empty sleeping bag, they found some cooking supplies, a shotgun, some ammo, and a journal that's last page was missing. But there was also one more thing that was inside of this tent. On the floor, right near the opening flap of this tent, was a glass jar. The warden picked it up, and he looked inside, and he gasped. Volcanic Brown was never seen again, and no explanation for what happened to him was ever uncovered. His body was never found, and there were no signs of struggle anywhere in or near his campsite. But the contents of that glass jar that was found inside of the tent proved that either Slumac's gold mine or Slumac's curse was real. There are two slightly different versions of what people believe was found inside of that jar. The first is that the jar was filled with huge nuggets of raw gold. If this is true, it means the gold mine did exist, and Volcanic must have found it before he disappeared. But the second version of what people say was found in that jar has a much darker meaning. In that version, when the warden held up that jar, he did see gold inside, but it was not gold from the mine. Instead, it was Volcanic's solid gold teeth. Almost 100 years have passed since Volcanic went missing, and still to this day, no one has ever successfully found the mine and lived to tell the tale. But to this day, people still keep looking for it, and so far, at least 33 people have either died or disappeared in search of it. And now, a clip from the newest episode of Wartime Stories. Enjoy.
Terrified for his own life, young Jose Correa fled from the area. Remembering what Diego Moreno had said about his terrible dream, for some 25 years, Jose resisted the urge to return to find the buried treasure himself. The passage of time, however, eventually dissipated Correa's fear. After a long and wearisome career as a police officer, he would do anything to secure an early retirement, and the temptation was too much to resist. After learning from Major Bell that only one parcel had been uncovered by the Basque shepherd, who had then returned home to Spain unharmed, Correa reasoned that he could safely return to the location and find the remaining 5. The Fresno tree had long since been cut down, but Correa suggested that he and his friend Major Bell go out and acquire a lease for the land where the tree once stood. Under the pretense of farming, they could then plow the area and turn up the remaining parcels without arousing any curiosity. At first, Bell said he wholeheartedly agreed to the idea. However, their plans would quickly go awry.
So that's going to do it. If you want more strange, dark, and mysterious content, remember we have a whole slew of podcasts under the Ballin Studios umbrella. They are the Mr. Ballin podcast, Mr. Ballin's Medical Mysteries, Run Fool, Bedtime Stories, and Wartime Stories. All of them are free. There are loads of episodes, and they are all of the strange, dark, and mysterious variety. All you have to do is go to any podcast platform, look up Ballin Studios, and boom, there are all of our podcasts for you to go binge. Thank you very much. Until next time, see ya. Today, we have a really cool video for you guys. It'll be a collection of 4 stories that are all fan favorites, and they all share a theme: camping horror stories. These stories have all been totally re-edited, so even if you've seen them before, it's gonna feel new and improved. That was the whole point of doing this. We wanted this to feel like a brand new viewing experience. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please offer to refill the like button's Keurig machine, but instead of using water, go ahead and take all the water from inside of those baggies that contain fresh mozzarella cheese and just dump that gross gray water in there. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. In April of 2020, a 17-year-old named Sam, who was an avid outdoorsman, decided to go on a one-night hike in the Superstition Mountains in Arizona. The mountain's name has a bunch of supposed origins, but the one that's generally accepted is people are afraid of the Superstition Mountains because of all the mysterious deaths that have occurred there. And so because people would avoid these mountains in fear of mysterious death, it became these superstitious mountains. But Sam was not superstitious and regularly came out here to go hiking, in particular on this 8-mile loop that went through a canyon. And so this one night overnight he planned on doing was going to be on that 8-mile loop where he'd do 4 miles in, camp out, and then 4 miles back. And he planned to do it with a friend, but his friend at the last minute canceled, and so Sam teetered on not even doing it, but ultimately decided, okay, I'll just do it by myself because I'm very familiar with this area. On the day he was supposed to go do this hike, he had planned on getting there early in the day to have maximum lighting, but due to some unforeseen circumstances and traffic and bad road conditions, he didn't get to the trailhead until 5:45 p.m. that night. Sam knew it was a bad idea to start this hike so late because he was going to run out of daylight. He probably was not going to make it 4 miles to the point where he planned on camping out. But he figured with his good health and fitness, he could probably quickly make his way to the 2 or even 3 mile mark, and there were some suitable campsites there. And so he decided he would kind of risk it and just try to go as fast as he could and use the daylight he had to reach a suitable campsite. But he wasn't able to move as fast as he thought he could, and soon the sun was down and it's totally dark, and he's got his flashlight, but that only is able to shine like 10 feet in front of him. And then at one point he nearly falls off of this rock, and he knows had he fallen, he would have gotten really badly hurt, and he's 15 miles away from the nearest help, and he's in a bad cell phone service area, and the roads getting out here are treacherous. No one knows exactly where he is, and it dawns on him that you've made a pretty bad choice, and you should stop right now and make camp here and not try to risk it any further. And so as it happened, where he was, there was this forest right nearby, and you could see there was a clearing about 30 feet off the path when he shined his light. And so he walked into that clearing, and he found it was a great spot to make camp. And in fact, on the edge of this clearing was the remnants of a fire pit. It was very old, but it at least showed someone had camped out right here, and they seemed to have made it just fine. So suddenly he was feeling pretty smart, and he felt pretty good about where he was staying for the night. Now, Sam intentionally did not bring a tent. He liked to sleep on a sleeping pad with a sleeping bag over that, and then he would string up a tarp over the top of him in case it rained. And since this clearing was surrounded by a bunch of pine trees, he was able to string up his tarp over the top, and it was perfect. And pretty soon he had a fire going, and then he cracked open a can of beans, and he began eating his dinner. And as he was eating, he started to get a sense that something was off, something was not right. He began scanning the tree line as if he was going to find something out of the ordinary, but his visibility was incredibly limited because he was sitting right up against a fire. And if you've ever sat next to a fire in a dark forest, your visibility is like 5 feet in a circle around the fire. You really cannot see beyond that. And his vision was also limited by all the pine trees that encircled his clearing. So he really could only see what was immediately around him, nothing else. And he starts thinking, that's gotta be it. Maybe I'm just nervous because I have no visibility. But as he's rationalizing this kind of bad gut feeling, a rock the size of a marble comes soaring into the campsite and lands at his feet. And he looks down at the rock, and immediately he connects that to that sense of dread he had. And he's looking around a little more aggressively now, but again, his vision is very, very limited. And so for the next 15 minutes, Sam is really aggressively scanning the tree line and listening really intently, and he doesn't hear anything, he doesn't see any more rocks get thrown. And so he begins to rationalize and convince himself that there's nothing wrong here. That feeling I have, oh, don't worry about that. He starts telling himself, you know, I must have kicked a rock, that's what it is. Or maybe a rock fell off a tree. But either way, it's something totally explainable and you got nothing to worry about. And after a little while, he convinced himself and he got into his sleeping bag under his tarp and he went to sleep. A couple of hours later, Sam wakes up and he has that same sense of dread, and now it's back with a vengeance. And he can't hear anything, he can't see anything, but he's definitely feeling like something is wrong. And at that moment, as he's listening really intently and looking really carefully, he hears the sound of rustling leaves. It sounds like someone's walking through leaves about 30 or 40 meters away from his campsite. And initially, he can't tell if this person or animal is walking towards his campsite or away, but over the next 30 seconds or so, the sounds start to fade, and he convinces himself that, okay, they've left and everything's fine. But just in case, he wanted to grab his flashlight and shine it in that direction, and so he reaches next to him where he had left it when he had gone to bed a couple hours earlier, and he can't find his flashlight. He's looking around for it, and he can't find it, and he's like, man, that's weird. I had it right here, right next to my body, and it's not here anymore. And that's when the alarm bells start going off in his head, because the only way this flashlight moves is if he moves it. And if it's not here, how did it move? And so he jumps out of his sleeping bag, he ducks out from under the tarp, and he's looking around on the ground in the immediate vicinity of where he was sleeping to find this flashlight. And as he's looking, out of the corner of his eye, he sees some light. And he turns his head, and in the same direction that he had heard those footsteps, those rustling leaves, when he was still laying down, he sees his flashlight laying on the ground about 10 meters away, which means someone or something had been less than a foot away from him to get this flashlight that was right next to him while he was fast asleep and totally helpless, and had moved it all the way over there. And immediately, Sam thinks to himself, that's a trap. They are trying to lure me away from my campsite. Suddenly, he felt so scared he wanted to vomit, but he knew in order to survive this situation, he needed to keep his wits about him. So he puts his boots on and he grabs his knife, and he knows he's not leaving this campsite. In fact, he's going to build the biggest fire he can. He's going to stoke that fire as big as he can get it, and he's not going to go anywhere near that flashlight. For the next several hours, Sam just stood in the middle of his campsite holding his knife, preparing to confront whatever the heck is out in the woods. And over those several hours, he would hear footsteps approach his campsite, turn around, and leave. Every time the fire got lower, he noticed they would come closer and closer and closer, and when he would stoke the fire, they wouldn't come as close. But at about 3 a.m., he ran out of firewood. So unless he went into the woods to get more, he'd be out, and he's certainly not going into the woods. That's the whole point, is to avoid the woods where this thing is. And so as the fire died down, Sam prepared himself mentally for whatever happened next, because he knew that with that fire gone, this thing was comfortable coming all the way in, coming all the way up right next to him to get the flashlight. And so finally, he hears the footsteps approaching, and before this, the closest they had come was maybe about 15 meters away. They were far enough away it didn't feel intimate. It was terrifying, but he had some distance. This time, they walk right up to about 3 meters away, but they intentionally come behind the thickest group of trees, so he can't see them. And it's still dark outside, and he's in that bubble of light near the fire, so he's blind to whatever's on the other side of those trees. But he knows they're there, and they've stopped. And for 2 hours, this poor kid is standing in the middle of this campsite, facing in the direction of whatever is behind the trees. Probably his imagination is going crazy at this point with what could be behind those trees, just waiting for whatever happened next. But ultimately, the only thing that would happen is the sun would eventually come up, and right before it actually popped over the horizon, this thing on the other side finally moved, it turned around, and ran away, and it did not come back. And so when the sun finally did come up, Sam didn't just charge out of there, because he's still thinking there could be a trap. He waited until it was totally full sunlight, and then he packed up everything he had, and he practically sprinted back to the parking lot, back into his car, and he drove nonstop for 20 miles until he got to a gas station where he could park and collect himself. And when he got there, he got out of his car, And he went in and he got a drink, and when he came out, he noticed someone had written something on the dust on the back window of his car. And he walks over and it just says, "Sleep well?" ? Sam is confident whoever was stalking him at his campsite is the same person or group of people that wrote this message on his car. And now Sam just wonders, what would have happened if I retrieved that flashlight? In 1982, a very outdoorsy teenage girl and boy who had recently started dating decided to go camping in Maine. Around 1 a.m. on the first night they were there, the girl wakes up because she has to go to the bathroom, and she's about to unzip her tent when she stops because she hears some strange noises coming from outside their tent. It wasn't that loud, but it sounded distinctly like something was digging in the ground. But she really had to go, and she figured, you know what, it's probably just some small animal or something. And so she begins to unzip the tent, and there's a little bit of moonlight that night, and there was a clearing outside of their tent. So the moonlight's pouring through, so she has plenty of illumination. And so she looks through this tiny hole, and she can't believe what she sees. It is a grown woman squatting down about 2 or 3 feet away from their tent. Her back is to them, so she can't see that she's looking through the tent. And she's feverishly digging into the ground in front of her. The girl literally falls backwards into her tent. She's so startled by what she sees, and she lands on her boyfriend, who immediately gets up, and he's like, "What's going on?" And she goes, "Shh." And she points at the little hole where she had unzipped the tent, and she goes, "Look." The boy is confused, but he can tell his girlfriend is very serious. So he sits up quietly and he looks through the little opening in the door and he sees the digging woman. The boy recoils and looks at his girlfriend and he's like, "What is going on out there?" He takes a flashlight and she's telling him, "Don't do it." And he opens up the tent a little bit more and he aims his flashlight directly on this woman. And this gets her attention and she stops digging and she stands up slowly and she turns around and faces them and she's got no expression. She's not giving them any indication why she's there. She's not acting aggressive. She's not acting scared. She's just completely neutral. And she stands there staring at them for quite a while before turning around and just walking away from their campsite. And after a little while, when they were pretty certain she was gone, they open their tent all the way, they go outside, they kind of scan around with their flashlights, and she's nowhere to be found, and they go to where she was digging, and it's just this weird 4-inch deep hole in the ground. There's no rhyme or reason to why she was doing that. And so after sitting there wondering what they should do, they settled on, well, tomorrow we'll tell the park rangers that she was here, and maybe they'll do something about it. And so feeling pretty confident that this woman's not going to come back, they both go back into the tent, they zip it shut, get in their sleeping bags, and they're about to go to sleep when they hear someone running towards their campsite. And they know it's this woman. They immediately unzip the tent and they look out, and now the woman's not digging anymore. She's rummaging through some of their stuff that's outside of their tent. And the way she's doing it, they described as monkey-like. She'd pick something up, look at it, and throw it over her head. She'd pick the next thing up, throw it over her head, back and forth, just throwing things behind her. And so the boy gets out and he shines a light on her and goes, "You need to leave." And she doesn't react. She just keeps flipping through all their stuff until he gets pretty forceful and says, "You need to leave right now." And at that point, she kind of stops and looks at him like, "Huh, what are you doing here?" And then she gets up, turns around, and walks away. Now the couple really doesn't know what to do because she's clearly willing to come back after being confronted. But they stayed outside their tent for about 15 more minutes, shining their light and making lots of noise and treating her like she's an animal. They're just trying to scare her away from the campsite. After a little bit of time, they thought, okay, there's no way she comes back now because, we were pretty aggressive with her this time and she seemed to really get it. They both do go back in the tent, and as soon as they zip it shut, they hear her come running straight back to the site, like she was literally waiting in the wings for when they went back in the tent. And this time she runs back to the hole in the ground and she's just feverishly digging into the ground as fast as she can. And this time they come out of their tent and they're mad and they are screaming at this woman to get the F out of here. What are you doing? And this seems to kind of frighten the woman, who gets up and she looks at them like, "Why are you yelling at me?" And she runs away, and it looked almost animalistic the way she was running away, like she was feral. The boy and the girl are totally shaken up at this point. It's about 1:30 in the morning, and this woman just keeps coming back to their site, and they don't know what to do about it, so they turn on some lanterns, and they turn on their flashlights, and they decide, we're just going to stay outside until the morning. That way we know she doesn't come back and doesn't steal anything from us. But by about 3:30 in the morning, they've been outside for 2 hours, they're getting cold, they're super tired, the woman's nowhere to be found. And so they finally say, you want to go back in and get some sleep? I think this time she's really gone. They get back in their sleeping bags and they go to sleep. They don't hear her again. The next morning when they get up and they unzip their tent, they look outside and all of their stuff has been thrown all over the campsite. And the hole in the ground that the woman had dug that was previously about 4 or 6 inches deep is now well over a foot deep. And they realize this woman must have been lurking in the shadows in the woods, watching them from 1:30 to 3:30 in the morning. That whole time they were out there kind of warding her off. She was just waiting, just watching them the whole time in the shadows. And as soon as they went into their tent, she must have given it a little bit of time, but then she ran right back over and she ransacked their site. But the strangest thing was, after they looked through all of the stuff she had chucked around, nothing was missing. There was some pretty expensive stuff that was laying out that she could have taken, but didn't. After they picked up their site, they went to the park ranger and they told them about what had happened, but the ranger has no idea what to make of it. He's never heard of such a thing. And so the couple just leaves that day because they're not about to spend another night here. And to this day, they have no idea why this woman was running onto their site and digging into the ground and rummaging through their stuff. It was like she was just a wild animal.
Oh, what is it you're holding? A cookie? You were chosen to become something more than you already are. I am every opponent you've ever faced.
In the early 2000s, a teenager named Evan and his father would regularly go hunting in the Georgia backcountry. When Evan turned 14, his father befriended a very wealthy landowner in Georgia who offered them access to one of his best private hunting areas. And just a couple of days later, on October 5th, Evan and his father would take him up on the offer. They woke up super early and they drove out to the edge of this property that was actually fenced in. And they went to a main gate where they had the combo that this guy had given them. They punched in the combo, opened up the gate, drove in, shut the gate, locked it, and then continued down the access road. They followed this road for about 2 miles where it came to a stop right outside of this huge forest. They parked their truck, they got out, they put on their gear, and in the pre-morning darkness began hiking into the woods. Even though they were there primarily to hunt, Eben and his father secretly enjoyed just hiking around the woods and camping out, and any chance they got to extend their hunting trips, they would, even if the hunting wasn't good. And so since they spent a ton of time in the woods together, they noticed almost immediately when they walked into this particular forest that something was off. There's no birds, there's no animals, silence. It's just totally silent. The only sounds they heard that were not them was a single plane that passed overhead. Although they found this very odd, they figured, you know what, this is private property, not a lot of people are out here. I'm sure as soon as we showed up, the animals were aware of us and they've scattered. They finally make it out to the hunting stand that the owner had told them about. They get all settled in, they're getting ready to see some animals, and all day long, they don't see a single animal. They don't hear a single animal. In fact, again, it is just completely silent. Frustrated, they began packing up their stuff, making their way down off the stand, and they started looking for a place to make camp for the night. And Eben's father suggested, well, hey, you know, there's obviously nothing over here. It's been quiet all day. Why don't we walk deeper into the woods a little ways, set up camp there, so tomorrow we have a better chance of seeing some animals. So they hiked for about an hour farther away from where they parked their truck, and they reached this clearing, which is perfect for setting up their camp. And so they set up their tent, and Eben's father says, hey, you know, we still got some daylight. Do you want to go try our luck and see if we can see some animals out here now? Eben's like, yeah, why not? So they hike a little ways away from their campsite, and they set up their blind, and once again, they don't see any animals. It's totally quiet. And so they turn around and they start heading back. As soon as they could see their campsite, which really was just their tent, they noticed that their tent was now collapsed. And Eben's father turns to him and says, oh, it must have been the wind. And Eben says, no, it couldn't have been the wind, because all day today we have been commenting on how quiet it is and how the fact that there's no weather, no wind, no anything is heightening the fact that it's completely silent. So it could not have been wind. So Eben's father is like, well, when you set the tent up, did you not put the posts into the eyelets? Did you not build it correctly? And Eben's like, no, I've made that tent like 1,000 times. I know it was set up correctly. They walk into their campsite and they look down at their tent and they're really confused at what they see. The 2 rods that go in an X over the top of the tent that thread through nylon loops and then anchor at 4 different points on the base of the tent, well, they had been removed from the 4 corners. And if you know how a tent works, It works on tension. And once you have a rod anchored in 2 points, it doesn't just pop out. It's anchored at 2 sides. It's actually difficult to remove each anchor. Once one is out, the other comes out easily. But basically, the rod would need to break in order for it to come out of those anchor points, or someone would have to come over and remove it. And they didn't remove them, and none of the rods were broken. Which leaves them with either they failed to set up their tent, even though they had distinct and clear memories of setting it up and double checking it was set up because they put gear inside of it, or someone came over to their campsite while they were gone and undid the 4 corners. They decide, you know what, it can't be some stranger coming over here because we're the only ones with the gate combo. This is private property and no one could have been here. And why would they do that if they came to our campsite? Why would they randomly collapse our tent and then vanish? So it had to be us. We must have not made the tent. And while they didn't really believe that they had not made their tent, they convinced themselves that that's what happened because the alternative was just too bizarre and frankly terrifying to consider. So they build their tent and they make a little fire and they stay up for a little while chatting before being tired and saying, okay, let's just go to bed. They extinguish the fire, they get in the tent, and they both fall asleep. A couple hours later, Eben wakes up suddenly and he's not sure if he's dreaming or not, but he thinks he hears someone laughing a couple hundred meters behind their tent off in the woods. Eben instinctively turns to make sure his dad is still in the tent with him, and he is. And then Eben starts listening really intently to what's happening outside. And all he can hear is silence, like it's been since they got in the woods. He doesn't hear any more laughter, and so he says, okay, I must have just been dreaming, and there wasn't any laughter out there, and eventually Eben goes back to sleep. A little while later, Eben wakes up suddenly again, except this time his dad is already awake and looking around anxiously. And Eben sits up and goes, what's going on? And his dad goes, and he goes, can you hear that? And Eben listens, and to his horror, he hears laughing. He wasn't dreaming before. Eben also realizes the laughter is not coming from the same area he heard it. It's now coming from the opposite direction, and it's a lot closer to them. Eben very quietly and carefully explains to his dad that he actually heard this laughter a couple hours earlier. And Eben's father turns to Eben and says, before we came out here, I asked the owner, should we expect any other hunters or campers or anybody nearby? And the owner said, this is private property. It's fenced in. There's no one there but you guys. After this revelation, they both turn their attention back to just listening because they're hoping this is just going to stop and whatever this is just going to leave. But it doesn't leave. They hear footsteps running towards them from way off in the forest. And it's so quiet, it's really easy to hear these footsteps. And whatever this is charging towards them. And then it comes to a complete stop right at the edge of their clearing. At this point, Eben is now grabbing onto his father. Eben's father is holding onto his rifle and he's getting ready to open the tent to confront whatever is out there. And right before he grabs the zipper...
Picture this. You're sitting at home alone watching YouTube videos, wondering why you can't find the motivation to do the things you...
Bada bing, bada boo.
There's this idea that trauma helps bond people together. Would you agree?
I can see that.
Okay, I mean it very lightly though. Like, you always see the relationship experts on TikTok being like, this is why you go to an amusement park on the very first date. Because the adrenaline, the energy, the rush, it can be translated into feelings of attachment and love very easily. It's an easy way to bond.
I don't know.
And even on a large scale, like, I can see how shared experiences, they help people come together. Like, have you seen Grey's Anatomy? I used to be obsessed with that show. It's a show about a hospital. There's doctors, there's nurses. They're just trying to get through their jobs without having like a mental breakdown on a daily basis. Some of them fall in love. Some of them get a divorce. Ultimately, it's about friendship. It's about forming these bonds and like supporting each other. Dr. Crush and Lucy Letby from the UK, from Chester Hospital, they were kind of on that boat. So whenever they would work on the same patients together, they would send these quick little text messages after work. We do work well together, don't we? Or, I felt proud about both of us. But these are just like the good times. During the tough times, they would also text each other. So whenever they lost an infant in the NICU, they would try to be with each other throughout the process. Dr. Crush would bring Nurse Lucy chocolates to help cheer her up. Sometimes they would make these little Starbucks runs together or share a lunch like tapas. He always encouraged her and he told her, nobody cares for infants the way that you do. You are a spectacular nurse, and you did your absolute best for these patients, and there is nothing more that you could have done, so you shouldn't harbor any guilt or frustration within yourself. But still, Nurse Lucy would say, yeah, I know, but I see these parents, I see them walking home without their babies, and it's just heartbreaking. And even if Dr. Crush wasn't able to take away Lucy's pain, at least she had some support during all of this. I think everyone at Chester Hospital especially, they needed some serious emotional support. Because in the past year, they had been losing infants at an alarming rate, a rate that didn't even match the national average of the infant mortality rates. So something is going on in these hospital walls, and they need to get to the bottom of it. And it seemed like Nurse Lucy, she could be the one to provide some insight. She was one of the most qualified nurses in the NICU. At work, everyone said, she's like this vanilla goody two-shoes. But they meant that in the nicest way possible. She always followed the rules. She picked up extra shifts. She did everything to a T. But at home, things were different. In a journal hidden in her room, Lucy had written Dr. Crush's name over and over and over, with hearts all around it. Dr. Crush heart, Dr. Crush heart, Dr. Crush heart, Dr. Crush heart. She wrote, my best friend, my love, I wanted you to stand by me, but you didn't. Love, I trusted you with everything. One day, I won't even think of you. I'm a failure, though. Broken-hearted, killing me softly. And down the hall in Lucy's home, if you opened up one of the bedroom doors, there was a bedroom decorated as a nursery with giraffes all over the walls. But the thing is, Lucy didn't have a child. She wasn't even planning on having a child. There was no other man in her life other than Dr. Crush. But Dr. Crush was already married. He already had children of his own.
So she has a nursery in the house.
Yeah, with no plans of having a child anytime soon. It's very odd, but that's not even the most curious thing about Lucy.
But we have a nursery at home.
Okay, for my niece. That's not even the most curious thing, though. Okay, so that maybe we can explain away. But there was another sticky note found in Lucy's house that read, I am evil. I did this. There are no words. I'm an awful person. I pay every day for it. I can't breathe. I can't focus. I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough for them. I'm a horrible, evil person, and the world is better without me.
I hope she killed
Then
herself.
in big, bold, red letters, she wrote down the words, kill me, and circled it over and over. Could these notes be a confession? Was she responsible for the uptick in infant deaths in the NICU? This is the story of Nurse Lucy, the most evil nurse in recent times, and probably one of the more recent serial killers to have been caught. As always, full show notes are available at RottenMangoPodcast.com. This case has been highly requested, and I wanted to wait till the trial was over to provide you with kind of a bit of a more complete story. I mean, this case went absolutely viral on most platforms recently because, and this is my personal opinion, I think it's crazy. I mean, there's no light way to put it. I think people were just having a very hard time understanding why someone would do something like this. And I don't think that the trial really answered any of those questions. So people are left with this feeling of like, what happened and how and why, and like, nothing feels like closure. Quick side note, the victims' families have requested that they and the names of their children be kept anonymous. So the victims are often referred to in court documents as baby A, B, C, and so on and so forth, all the way to baby Q. There's
Baby Q, that's, whoa.
There's a lot of victims in this case. And I'm gonna use the name that begins with the letter so it's easier for you to track, and we will be using random pseudonyms for the parents and family to respect their privacy. There are also other nurses and doctors at this hospital whose names are available online, but as a precaution, I'm just gonna be shortening their names just in case they don't want their full names in the full episode. But you can find their names online rather easily. So, with that being said, let's get into it. Nurse Lucy worked in the neonatal NICU unit at Chester Hospital. And I'm gonna try to put it nicely for Nurse Lucy, but she could be a bit much. She could be a lot to handle for some of the other nurses. To me, at least, from what we could dig up from the internet, she gives off very strong brown noser vibes. She would be the type to do everything that she was asked to do and then try to do your job too. Which, okay, fine, it sounds kind of like a joy to be around, right? But a lot of the times it's just straight up agitating. Oh, there goes perfect Nurse Lucy, the most qualified nurse in the NICU, sticking her head in everybody's business. Like, imagine you're changing a patient's diaper, right? She pops her head in. Did you change the diaper? Don't forget to I'm changing the diaper. Like, what? I'm doing it. You can visually see that I'm doing it right now. That's kind of the vibe she gives off. Just checking in on everybody's patients. It's insulting in the sense that sometimes Nurse Lucy can come off as someone who believes that only she can do a good job and everyone else needs her opinion or her help. She would even be a bit too much for the parents of the babies in the NICU. So sometimes it's something particular. Sometimes it's something she says or does in front of the parents. Most of them didn't even register it at the time as being creepy because, you know, the parents in the NICU, they've got way bigger things on their minds, right? But it would be one of those instances where they go home, they finally get some rest, they're laying in bed and they're staring at the ceiling thinking, huh, that was weird. Like, honey, did you hear that? That was so strange. Why do you think she said that? A lot of the times it was just kind of the energy she gave off. Nurse Lucy liked to hover, all at the wrong times. When parents wanted some alone time to gather their emotions, she's just hovering. When parents are grieving an unspeakable loss, she's just hovering. She's like always lingering somewhere nearby and you just feel eyes on you in your most vulnerable moments. That's how Alice felt. Alice felt like she was living in a repeat nightmare that would just start all over whenever the morning began. She didn't even know how she was going to start processing the trauma of the past few weeks. But today, she felt strangely calm. In this instance, this was probably the first time in a while that she just felt collected. Maybe it's the water. Maybe it's the smell of the baby soap. Her mind just felt so clear. And she just wanted to cherish this moment. She wanted to soak in every second of it. She focused on the feeling of the warm water, and with one hand, she's like scooping up water and bringing it over her baby's legs in the hospital baby bathtub. And then she would get half a pump of soap on her fingers, and her baby was quiet. So Alice, like any other new mom, she's trying to take the time to memorize her kid's face. She's like trying to memorize the color of her eyes, like her smooth forehead, the round cheekbones that are buried under the layers of squishy baby fat. And all the while she's having this beautiful moment with her child, she can feel this looming presence behind her. Nurse Lucy is hovering over this precious moment. To be fair, Nurse Lucy was the one that suggested Alice bathe her baby, and even though privacy right now would be nice, Alice couldn't hate her for trying to be helpful, right? Lucy said, I can take some pictures to remember this special moment if you want. Alice just wished that she would shut up, just stop talking. But she tried her best to just block out Nurse Lucy and all her questions and just focus on her baby. She needed to use all her focus to memorize how it felt to hold her baby in her arms. Her baby who was too still in the water. Her baby that would not be coming home with her. Alice's water broke at 27 weeks. That is 3 months too early. We actually went through this with my sister, where my sister's water broke early, not 27 weeks early, but she was turned away from the hospital. The hospital didn't believe Alice either. When she was like, my water broke, they were like, no, it didn't. She was sent home, and 3 days later, she was rushed to a massive hospital and gave birth prematurely. And at first, baby was doing fine. Baby was okay. After being transferred to Chester Hospital, though, that's when her precious child flatlined 2 times, and the 3rd time, doctors were unable to save her. So that's how Alice found herself burying her tiny baby the day before her original due date. So it's a special type of pain for Alice, and her family had already moved out all the baby stuff so that she wouldn't have to see it, she wouldn't have to process that emotion, and that just the visuals of that would be so heartbreaking. But she couldn't escape the fact that moms, when they give birth, their bodies crave that baby. Because your body is confused. It's very hard to tell your body, like, hey, baby's not here, and that's okay. We're going to get through it. Your body is like, I've worked like 10 months. Where is my child?
Exactly.
The day after the funeral, so the original due date of Alice's baby, a letter appears in the family mailbox. It reads, "To the family, there are no words to make this time any easier. It was a real privilege to care for Isabel and to get to know you as a family. A family who always put baby first and did everything possible for her. She will always be a part of your lives and we will never forget her. Thinking of you today and always. Sorry I can't be there to say goodbye. Nurse Lucy." Okay, so nurses don't usually send letters like this to the families of the parents, but you could argue that Lucy had gotten to know the family well during their time at the hospital. Maybe she just wanted Alice and the rest of their family to know that the loss of baby Isabel has impacted all the nursing staff at Chester, and that her baby would never be forgotten. But Lucy wasn't telling the full truth in the letter. There are things that she left out. Like how Alice's baby was the 7th baby to die in the NICU unit that year. She talked about how the whole staff had been affected, but they weren't just affected by sadness or grief. They were sad, yeah, but they were also very worried. And maybe even a little bit suspicious. 7 babies? That's way above the national average. That doesn't even make sense. The nurses and doctors weren't sure what was wrong. But each baby, they had died of health complications due to being born premature. It seemed natural, but then again, infant mortality rates had never been this high at Chester, so why the sudden spike? So there were these rumors going around. Because, you know, when you don't have an answer, there's rumors. And the first rumor was, okay, this was like a smaller rumor, but it was a rumor that Chester was haunted. Or cursed, or maybe it was the air or the water supply. Something was bad in the water, tainted, contaminated. Maybe some new medical equipment was interacting with the NICU infants in an odd way. It just didn't make sense. There were even some whispers that the hospital water pipes had been contaminated with feces, and the nurses would wash their hands in there and then touch the babies, and it could easily spread germs and diseases and viruses. So at first it was the hospital is haunted, then someone cursed the hospital, then it was the feng shui of the hospital was off, then the water pipes, and then it was one of the nurses in the hospital that was a serial killer. That was a rumor. And Dr. J was not having it. He was not a big fan of superstitions nor rumors. He prided himself in obviously being a man of science, right? He's like, haunted? People have died everywhere. Unfortunately, just about every single inch of this earth would be haunted then. Cursed? Nobody can curse a building where people try to save lives. It just wouldn't work. Because the hospital halls, they hear more prayers than the churches. That's the saying, right? The water pipes? Okay, that's something we should definitely look into. But the rumor that Nurse Lucy was somehow involved in the deaths of a ton of babies in the NICU, that, to Dr. J, feels like a pending lawsuit ready to implode.
You're saying that there are suspicions of her already in the hospital by the coworkers.
By the other nurses and some of the doctors. That she's like a full-blown serial killer. And Dr. J is like, that literally doesn't make sense. He's like, the hospital doctors, the managers, you can't just go around whispering to each other about how she might be involved and try to ruin her career and reputation without any concrete evidence. That is a ticking defamation lawsuit. That is an employer lawsuit waiting to happen. That's what he thought. Until one day, he's walking by the NICU hallway on the way back to his office when he heard the alarms just blaring. A baby is coding. But after 1 or 2 seconds, the alarm stops going off. He still makes that immediate detour into the NICU, and he sees the baby in the clear plastic box wriggling around, and he sees Lucy Letby. And it's just an eerie sight. He said, like, standing like a tombstone over the baby's box. And I'm sure there was something in that split moment. Maybe she was just staring at the baby in a certain way, something that he just felt immediately uncomfortable.
Probably unnatural.
Yeah.
Not a normal response in that moment.
It was just weird. It was weird. And, you know, the rumors were that every baby that had died or had been in critical condition had collapsed. Nurse Lucy Letby was there. And here she was, again, But he didn't have time to think about that. The blood oxygen readout was super low. The baby's heart rate was elevated. He ran over. He sees the baby laying there, and his blood is running cold. The baby is supposed to have a breathing tube on. Baby Kayla was 12 weeks premature, and her lungs hadn't finished developing. But the breathing tube wasn't on the baby, in the baby. It had been pulled out and laying next to baby Kayla. And now baby Kayla's chest is not moving. So Dr. J grabs the tube, hooks baby Kayla back up to the oxygen. Her chest is finally moving. She's still showing these minor signs of distress and discomfort, but her blood oxygen levels are evening out. It's a close call. Nurse Lucy stood there most of the time without doing anything important. This is what he said. She looked busy. She was going through papers and adjusting machines, but she wasn't actually doing anything. Like, imagine a baby is dying and I'm kind of like organizing the machine, kind of like straightening it out. Dr. J felt like she was doing random things that made her look busy without actually getting anything done. Like, that's one thing, though, if you work a 9-to-5 office cubicle job doing that. It's another thing when you're doing that when there's a dying baby right next to you and you're a nurse. So when he leaves the NICU, Dr. J feels so shaken up. He didn't even go back to his own office like he had originally planned. He goes straight to the head office of the neonatal unit to talk to Dr. B. And he realized 3 things. 1, Nurse Lucy was the only one in that room with the babies. 2, when Dr. J walked in, she wasn't doing anything already to help the baby, but the alarms had already sounded. Why wasn't she in action? 3, Dr. J clearly heard the alarm turn on and then turn off again, but when he got to the room, the readout was still low, so the alarm should have still been sounding. Did the alarm fail and it just stopped, or was the machine broken? Or did someone manually turn it off?
And you're telling me there's no cameras in these rooms?
So the NICU in the UK didn't have cameras until 2020, mandatory. This is 2015.
Wow,
yeah.
Come on.
So he wanted to believe that the baby pulled out her breathing tube on her own and the whole alarm thing was just a coincidence, but he couldn't explain away the fact that Lucy wasn't doing anything to help the baby. But at this point, there's still not much evidence that Dr. J or any of the nurses or any of the doctors had. Like, there's nothing that they could do right now. They were playing a very dangerous rumor game. If it turned out to be false, they could ruin an innocent woman's life and career and face a massive defamation lawsuit that would probably put this hospital out of business. If it turned out to be true, then they would need a lot more evidence to get her behind bars, and that would be difficult. Because unfortunately, death is a numbers game, and humans have like the losing end of it. So no matter how much each nurse and doctor on that floor begs and prays not to lose a patient, that's just not how it works. All they can do is their best and hope that they're fighting off death for their patients with everything that they have, but sometimes there's just nothing more that you can do. You've exhausted all the resources. So for that very reason, the first death in a string of very suspicious deaths was actually not alarming at all. That's not to say it wasn't devastating or heartbreaking, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't like setting off these red alarms in everyone's minds. June 2015 is when it all started. There were these 2 twins in the NICU, baby Andy and baby Bella. They were born inside of the Chester Hospital, and they were actually born 9 weeks premature. So their mom, Renee, was classified as a high-risk pregnancy, and carrying the twins full term was just putting way too much stress on her body. It would be dangerous for not only her health, but the baby's health, for them to stay in there any longer. And so she's freaking out. She's a first-time mom, and the doctors are like, you're gonna have an emergency C-section, like, right now. And the nurses are like, don't worry, everything's gonna be okay. Your babies are gonna be fine. We have an amazing NICU unit. We have so much experience giving care to premature babies. They're gonna stay safe and warm in their cozy little boxes. You can visit them all day. They'll get the care that they need. And then you guys can all go home once you're all ready, okay? They honestly were just trying to get her heart rate down before the C-section. And she knew it, but it helped. The birth went perfectly fine. I mean, both of the twins, they did have some complications, and both of them were sent to the NICU to receive care. But, I mean, the nurses showed Renee her babies. The parents were allowed to hold them, and the nurses pinky swore, we're going to take good care of them. You need to go back to your room and rest. And that's what they did. until a nurse burst through their door and said, "Sorry to interrupt, but you're urgently needed in the NICU." They had no idea what was going on. So they leave their little forks of food because they were eating dinner, and they rush to the NICU. And they kept asking the nurses, "What do you mean? Like, what's wrong? What happened?" And the nurse doesn't respond. She's just speed walking to the NICU. These are all very, very bad signs. Renee could feel this pit in her stomach that something was wrong with her babies. When they arrive, there's a team of doctors huddled around baby Andy. One doctor had 2 of his thumbs side by side on Andy's chest. These are how tiny these babies are, okay? Most of these babies weren't even 4 pounds. Most of them are premature, most of the victims. So just think about how tiny they are.
4.
We've got about 50 million followers. We're in the billions of views, and we're a small team. We always felt like our content was all about entertainment and being fun, but there was also this, sort of professional business side. One of the things that
Pounds?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Sophie was like 8 pounds when she was born, yeah.
Wow.
And the doctor is like pushing down once, twice, 3 times, and Renee could see the sweat just dripping off his hair. There was another doctor in the corner of the room that was drenched in sweat, catching his breath. It looked like he had been doing CPR. And finally, a nurse told the parents, "We're not really sure what happened. His alarms went off. He's been receiving CPR for about 40 minutes, but his pulse is not going to come back. We called you so that you could say goodbye." Renee couldn't even process what was going on. Her baby was fine yesterday. Her baby was fine this morning when they saw him, and again in the afternoon, but suddenly he flatlined. Like, there's no answers. What do you mean? She just felt this guilt. She had this autoimmune disease. So mom had an autoimmune disease that made her blood clot more than it should. So she's thinking, maybe I passed it on to one of my twins, and something happened and Andy's blood couldn't get where it needed fast enough, and maybe it's all my fault. The doctor kept performing CPR, but Andy was already blue in the face. The more CPR they did, the more damage they would likely cause his little body. And Renee didn't even know how to respond, and she just felt this hand on her arm, and it was her mom. So baby Andy's grandma was in the hospital, and she must have heard the commotion. And she looked at her child, Renee, and told her something that I don't think any mom should have to tell their child, which is, "It's hard. I know it's hard. But you have to let go, okay?" The doctors stopped the compressions. They unhooked baby Andy from all his machines, and he was able to spend his last few moments with his family. There was this suffocating silence in the hospital that night. Each nurse, each doctor, their shoulders felt a bit heavier. Nobody could even try to lighten the mood with a joke. It was arguably a very, very rough day. The doctor who did baby Andy's chest compressions, he had to take a whole week off work because this was the first baby he had ever lost. After the parents had time to grieve baby Andy and say their goodbyes, a nurse approached them and said something along the lines of, "Hi, I'm Nurse Lucy. I'm so sorry for your loss. I just wanted to give you these." They looked down, and in Nurse Lucy's hands, there were a copy of Andy's hand and footprints. Renee took the prints and made them into a necklace. She wore that necklace around her neck every single day.
What exactly does she do?
Like the footprints in probably a ceramic or something. She wore that necklace every single day until she found out her son was murdered by the person who took those prints. Now, mind you, Renee is not even able to grieve in the comfort of her home. She's still in and out of that hospital. Her body is healing. Her other baby, Andy's twin, baby Bella, was still in the NICU. And of course, Renee feels this massive anxiety of what if something happens to baby Bella too? But it seems like all the nurses are giving her good feedback, good news. Baby Bella seems stable. She seems healthy. Now, side note, in the UK, the average infant mortality rate is 1 to 2 per 1,000 births. In 2014, Chester Hospital had overseen 3,000 births, and they had lost 3 babies. So it's right on par. So now, when they lost Andy, nobody in that hospital is suspecting that something was wrong. They believed that his death was completely natural. And it wasn't until baby Bella, Andy's twin sister, fell gravely ill, and baby Charlie, another premature baby in the NICU unit that died, that everyone's like, what the hell is going on? Like, what on earth is going on?
Wow.
Baby Charlie died just 4 days after baby Andy. And many of the nurses on shift, they had to take breaks crying in the break room. It just didn't make sense. One nurse said, baby Charlie was tiny. He was barely 2 pounds. Like, that's less than a bag of sugar in weight. 2 pounds. But she said, he was the feistiest little baby I had ever seen. So it just didn't make sense when the alarms go off blaring. Charlie is coding. And one of the nurses remembers how they all rushed to respond. They tried an oxygen mask on baby Charlie, then CPR. And then the most qualified nurse in the NICU unit, Nurse Lucy, suggested they try putting an oxygen tube through his trachea. But ultimately, Charlie didn't make it. And everyone was hit so hard by this, like, including Nurse Lucy. I mean, 2 babies in 1 week, this is a lot for the staff to digest. Lucy texted her coworker that wasn't at the hospital that day and said, it wasn't a great start to the shift, but sadly it just got worse. I'm struggling to accept what happened to baby Andy, and now we lost baby Charlie overnight, and it's just all a bit much. I know it happens, but it's still so sad and cruel, isn't it? I just keep seeing them both. No one should have to see and do the things that we do, and it's heartbreaking, but, you know, it's not about me. We must learn to deal with it. Her coworker said, you should try switching off your shifts for the rest of the week. Like, take a break. You were there for both deaths. I'm sure it's not easy, basically.
It's so sick because she actually says the right thing. So she's like, the emotion she's trying to mock is very on par with what most people feel like, right?
Prosecutors would actually argue that not to this coworker, but to Dr. Crush, the doctor that she has a crush on. We're going to get to it later. But they argued that she might have even killed these babies to make these conversations happen. Yeah, we're going to dissect all of that in a second. But she continued, it's not about me. It's about the poor parents who have to walk away without their baby. So now 2 babies have died, and there's been 1 close call. I mean, things are a little weird, but again, not suspiciously so, until there was a 4th. Baby Diana wasn't premature. She was just in the NICU unit because her birth had taken a really long time, and the doctors were worried that she had caught an infection from it. This is actually the hospital's fault.
Wait, so baby Bella's not passed yet?
Baby Bella almost died, but she survived.
Oh.
Yes. So baby Andy, baby Charlie, and now baby Diana. Baby Diana was not premature. The other 3 babies were premature. Baby Diana was actually in the NICU because of a mistake that the hospital made. So I believe when a mother's water breaks, but no one accepts it, or like she doesn't go into labor, something of that sort, the baby is very likely to get an infection, and so is the mother. So one of the first things that the staff do are put them on antibiotics, but someone forgot to do that. So now baby Diana had to be in the NICU because they didn't know if she was going to catch an infection the day that she was born, and that could jeopardize her health, that could be deadly. So Diana stopped breathing 3 separate times the very night that she was born. She was showing signs of pneumonia. The breathing mask brought her back twice, but the 3rd time she didn't make it. So far we have babies Andy, Bella, Charlie, and Diana, and the only survivor is Bella. And then all within the month, the hospital loses another baby. Baby Elliot. And they almost lose baby Elliot's twin brother, baby Freddie. And then immediately after that, they lose baby Grace.
They don't have reasons, they couldn't figure out why, what's the cause?
So each baby had a different cause listed on their post-mortem. So one of them was like their heart stopped, the other one was a bowel infection, one of them was insulin levels were not great. So it did seem natural, but it still didn't make sense. Even if it was natural, like, it's just a puzzling thing. So Dr. B, the head of the neonatal unit, he's sitting in his office with a pile of papers probably this high in front of him, and he's got records of all the 5 babies that they lost this year. 5. Within like a month too, okay? So it's not even like spread once a month, you know? This time last year, they had only lost 1 baby. This year, they had lost 5, and it's only halfway through the year. It's his job to figure out what the hell is going on. He could be seen coming out of his office with dark circles just dragging all the way to his chin. When he wasn't working with patients, he spent every single second in his office trying to figure out what the connection was with all of these sudden infant deaths. It just didn't make sense. There was no connection. Baby Andy's heart stopped. Baby Charlie stopped breathing. Baby Diana died of pneumonia complications. Baby Elliot had a bowel infection, most likely from birth complications relating to the placenta. Baby Freddie's body was producing too much insulin. And baby Grace was given a 5% chance of survival at birth because of how premature she was. There's no connection. So it's not like, oh, the water is tainted, it's in the water, right? Dr. B felt like he was going crazy. And no, this is not like the silent killer of South Korea. There would be no emails to figure out what kind of mysterious illness was sweeping the nation. It was just going on inside of Chester Hospital. So he's like, okay, this is in my unit, and I need to find out what's going on, and I need to find it fast. He thought of everything. He thought maybe there's something in the preemie baby formula. So all the premature babies are being fed a certain formula. Maybe it's in there. But there are other premature babies that had consumed the same formula, but they were fine. Then was it the air, the water? Hospital air filters are cleaned regularly up to standards, and the hospital ran off city water. Initially, Dr. B never suspected a healthcare worker, let alone anyone from his team, to be responsible. I mean, the very people that he works alongside to save lives, yeah, no, he's got faith in his team. They were as devastated and as confused as he was, and he could see it on their faces every day. Each day they came into work, they looked more exhausted, they looked more emotionally drained, they looked so upset. So he pulled up the shift chart to see which nurses or doctors he could talk to when the deaths occurred, just to get a better sense of what was going on. But that's when he noticed something that was just very chilling. For every single shift where a baby died, collapsed, or came close to dying, Lucy was on staff. She was there for every single one. There were some nurses that had been on shift for 2, 3, maybe 4, even 5, but Lucy had been there for every single one. She was the only one that had been there for every single one. And Dr. B started laughing. He's like, okay, I'm losing my mind. Okay, I need to go outside and touch grass, because just because Lucy is on shift doesn't mean she's in charge of those babies. He pulled up her charts. In fact, she was only in charge of 1 or 2 of the victims that died. Okay, you know, that makes sense, right? Each nurse has to take care of 3 or 4 babies at a time per shift. Lucy had other babies in other rooms, not just in the NICU, and all the babies who died or who had close calls, they were all in the NICU. So maybe it's not Lucy, maybe it's still just the NICU. Something's going on there. He didn't want to say it, though. But maybe there was a feeling that Lucy's not a serial killer, but maybe she's the curse. Because this happened soon after she was hired. Maybe she just had bad omens. It's messed up when you think about it, to say that someone just carries bad luck with them, or comes into a new place and bad luck strikes because of them. It's mean. And since he knew Lucy's background, it felt even more mean-spirited. Lucy had worked her whole life to be a nurse. She had this dream since she was a freaking baby, okay? Nurses had saved her life when she herself was in the NICU. She wanted to be a nurse ever since she heard that story from her parents as a kid. She studied like crazy. She got more qualifications than any other nurse in the NICU. She was the most qualified, even though she was one of the youngest nurses working. She would constantly spend her off days getting more qualifications.
Oh my God.
She was only 28. Her former Boston colleagues, they only had amazing things to say about her. They all said, she's incredibly hardworking. Vanilla goody two-shoes. That's how they describe her. But still, the deaths had absolutely nothing in common but Nurse Lucy. And Dr. B couldn't help but be suspicious now. He brought it up to his boss, and by the time that his boss saw the email and replied to it, 2 more babies had already died. The email response was not what Dr. B was expecting. Basically, they said, you know, it's unfortunate, but it's all just a coincidence. There's no proof of anything. First of all, Lucy has a great track record, and all the babies had died of natural causes related to their birth and nothing else. They were all premature, and most had difficult or high-risk pregnancies from the get-go. Side note, a lot of people had problems with this response because it felt like the unit manager, so Dr. B's superior, wasn't even trying to listen or figure out what was going on in the NICU. Yeah. It seemed like they were just shutting down any ideas at all that Lucy was involved. So you could argue maybe they genuinely thought that Lucy was not involved, and this was all some sort of sick coincidence, and they're trying to give her the benefit of the doubt. Or 2, people said, it's like they don't want to open Pandora's box. Yeah. Like, imagine you're in this long, dark hallway, and at the very end is this door, and behind it you hear all sorts of terrifying screams and growls and scratching noises. When you open that door, there's no going back. Whatever's behind that door is coming out, and you don't know what it is. Maybe it's a monster. Maybe it's a speaker playing monster noises. You don't know. So they're like, let's keep the door shut.
Yeah.
Let's never open this door, put a do not open sign on it.
And you say 2 more people die in that process?
Yeah, 2 more babies. Yeah.
Oh, God.
I mean, I guess we'll never really know what the unit manager was thinking, but it is just a little weird. These are all just speculations. Now, the unit manager more or less told Dr. B that there was just no way that a nurse was involved in the uptick of infant deaths in their hospital. Especially not Nurse Lucy. She's the most qualified nurse in the NICU. And she's the type that took her job so seriously. Maybe to the point where other nurses might want her to loosen up a bit. The unit manager said, look, Dr. B, I can personally vouch for Lucy. She's a good nurse. There is no way that she's connected to all of this. Dr. B was like, yes, I respect your opinion, but of course, lives are being lost, so I'm going to go over you and request a meeting with a few of the hospital executives. He emails them in March. They don't even email him back till May. So for months, they don't really talk to him. But at least in May, he gets in front of them and he tells them everything that he knows.
So again, it sounds like he's the only one that cared.
Yeah, him and a few of the other doctors, Dr. J and 2 more doctors. So 4 doctors from the unit cared, but he's the head of the neonatal unit, so he's doing a lot of the communications with the superiors and the executives. So he's laying it bare to them. Like, these are my suspicions. These are why I have these suspicions. Obviously, I don't have concrete proof, but, like, you can't tell me that things aren't weird. You can't tell me that we shouldn't at least get some sort of third-party investigator involved.
Yeah.
The conversation allegedly went something along the lines of, was she the charge nurse for all the instances? Meaning, was she the nurse in charge? No, a lot of the time she was in another unit, but she was on shift. But she wasn't assigned all the babies in every instance. No, and the manner of death was all natural? Yeah, so it's a coincidence then. It's unfortunate and it's tragic, but it's a coincidence. The executives recommended that he switch Lucy from the night shift to the day shift. All these instances had happened at night, so if it really was a coincidence, then changing Lucy's position should have no effect. So in late May, Lucy was switched to the day shift, and it just seemed like Dr. B wasn't the only one that suspected Nurse Lucy of something. They didn't know what yet, but they suspected her of something. Like the other hospital staff, they started analyzing everything Lucy did, and they had been putting together these little pieces. Some of the nurses actually started whispering to each other, saying that Lucy was just a little bit too interested in NICU babies. She kept popping into the NICU unit when she was assigned to other units. For example, Nurse Ellis was assigned to 3 to 4 babies one night in the NICU. She was on shift with Lucy, but Lucy was assigned 3 to 4 babies in another unit, so not the NICU. Lucy's babies were healthy babies, and they were in another place down the hall. She had no reason to be in the NICU that night, but while Nurse Ellis is giving care to her babies, every time she would turn around, there was Nurse Lucy, cooing at the babies, checking their vitals, and at first, Ellis is trying to keep it polite, like, oh, sorry, is that baby yours? I thought I was assigned to that baby. I could be wrong, but let me go check my charts real quick. And then Lucy would be like, oh, no, you're right. I was just stopping by because she's so cute. I'll get going now. But 5 minutes later, it would happen again. And Nurse Ellis would be at the computer updating the baby's chart, and when she turned around, there was Lucy. Oh, hi again. Something wrong? Anything I can help you with? No, everything's okay. When it happened a 3rd time, Nurse Ellis was very frank with her. She said, Lucy, this is my baby under my care. Please go back to your section. Obviously, hindsight is 20/20. I did see some people online arguing about whether these particular nurses should have known something was wrong. But like, really? I feel like I would be annoyed at my colleague, but my immediate thought, and maybe I'm still just too naive, was, oh, God, she's so annoying.
Yeah, it's like, to suspect that, it's almost you have the darkest...
Like, there's something wrong with you, almost.
Yeah, you think you see people in probably the worst light possible. It's hard for a human to be, oh my God, is she trying to kill people? Like, that's just not,
Like, to think, oh, is she out here scoping out potential murder victims in the NICU? Like, most nurses were like, oh, there goes Nurse Lucy. Is one of the doctors around? Is she trying to look good? Is she trying to undermine my position and act like I'm not good enough to take care of these NICU babies? And they would all say, like, must be so nice to be so young and have so much energy to do your job and everybody else's. Like, that was kind of the energy. But then things started to change. So when she started popping in on stable babies, everything was fine. It's annoying, but it's fine. But then the nurses started seeing her near babies whose conditions would suddenly take a turn for the worst. More and more stories like this, they start floating around the hospital staff. One person saw Lucy in a baby's room alone right before the baby's condition took a turn for the worse. Another staff member saw Lucy watching from the window while two parents cradled their deceased baby for the final time. And they even had to ask Nurse Lucy to leave because the parents were feeling so unsettled and so uncomfortable in probably the worst moment of their life. She was just hovering around them, watching them like some sort of grief vampire. She's like soaking in it. She's not like smiling, okay? So again, it's not one of those instances where she's got like this creepy Joker clown smile and everyone's like, oh my gosh, she's a killer, we gotta do something. It's just like, she just seems too invested. Like, please, read the room, social cues. Dunchi, we call it in Korean. In another instance, a nurse was taken aback when a baby was in distress and Lucy told them off when they attempted to assist. And the nurse said, I was shocked because I'm a nurse, you know, and I just know that you can't have enough help in these situations. I just never expected a nurse to tell me to like back off, basically. Then Lucy would pop in to check on babies that weren't her responsibility, and it was just generally a lot of crazy coincidences. When Lucy was on the night shift, these crazy coincidences happened during the night shift. When she was switched to the day shift, all of a sudden they started happening during the day. So everybody knew about the rumors, even Nurse Lucy. She was really upset about them, okay? And she wasn't afraid to voice her disgust. She said she had been nothing but a great nurse since 2012, and it's been like 3 years, and these random rumors are popping up out of nowhere. She told the other nurses, yeah, maybe I would understand cause, big or small, but the whole thing is based on coincidence, a coincidence that is the hospital's fault to begin with. And you're like, what do you mean the hospital's fault? Lucy would argue, they say I'm on shift for every single death. That's true. Lucy knows that's true. Everyone knows that's true. But Lucy argued, because I'm literally always on shift. To give you context, Lucy was a 28-year-old nurse who lives alone, no family, no boyfriend, not a lively friend group or a crazy social life. She had given up her whole life to becoming a nurse, she argued. And because she doesn't have a ton of personal obligations like many of the other nurses that had kids or elderly parents to take care of, Lucy would inevitably end up picking up shifts. One of the nurses has to take her kids to a dentist appointment, Lucy would pick up her shift. Another nurse has to go to another city to care for their elderly parents, Lucy would pick up her shift. Lucy pretty much just took every shift that she was asked for. And out of everyone in the hospital, she probably had the most shifts, yeah. Okay, fine, whatever, right? So she argued, I mean, if I'm always at the hospital, then of course I'm always there when issues arrive, because I'm always at the hospital. And now the hospital wants to use her as a scapegoat, she says, to cover up their own problems and shortcomings. For one, Lucy argued the hospital is so understaffed and underfunded. This statistic actually does, it does clear. It checks, right? And this stat really only applies to the infants in the NICU, not just babies or infants in general in hospitals. But when babies are in intensive care units, the staffing rate is much, much higher. So typically in the US and places like the UK, it's 1 nurse per baby in NICU. Yeah, at most. At most, it's 1 nurse per 2 NICU babies. Lucy argued at their hospital, Chester Hospital, they had each nurse take about 3 to 4 babies. So if a nurse is only able to give a baby a fourth of the time that they need, then there's a higher chance that a small problem will go unnoticed until it turns into a big problem that is too big to fix. To sum it up, she's saying the hospital was experiencing this abnormally high infant mortality rate because of their own lack of funding, their own lack of staff, and since Lucy was the only common thread between all of them, they're blaming it on her. They're using her as a scapegoat to cover up the real institutional problems at fault here, and she's not going to take the fall for it. She was super frustrated because prior to all of this, she had a stellar reputation in her field. She worked nonstop. She took extra courses to get extra qualifications and certifications. She just wanted to gain more knowledge. She took this seriously. And in the beginning, Lucy actually had quite a lot of people defending her. Her old friends from college that weren't working at Chester Hospital, so I'm not sure how much weight their opinions hold here, but her friends from college and all of her close colleagues, they all said, Lucy Letby is a vanilla goody two-shoes, okay? She is so adverse to even breaking a tiny, tiny little rule.
We know
she couldn't have done anything that she's accused of. So without a doubt, we stand by her.
Yeah, neither could my uncle.
I've grown up with Lucy, and not a single thing that I've ever seen or witnessed of Lucy would, you know, let me for a moment believe that she was capable of the things she was being accused of.
You seem utterly unshakable on this, but isn't it possible she's fooled you all?
Unless Lucy turned around and said, I'm guilty, I will never believe that she's guilty.
If there's like a candy bowl that says take one piece, she's not gonna take two. She's just not. That's not her, okay? I mean, she's the most vanilla girl we've ever met. She comes from a nice family with 2 loving parents who are still together, a stable household. She wants to be a nurse. She's got blonde hair, blue eyes, a big smile. She's just, I mean, her idea of going crazy is, like, this is her idea of being unhinged. Sparkly eyeshadow and probably a shot or 2 of tequila. So anytime she texted her friends or coworkers about any problems she was suddenly having at work, all of them were backing her up. They're comforting her. They told her, you know, we know that you would never do something like this, and they're just being idiots. They're just being douchebags. They're trying to find a scapegoat. It's not you, it's them. It's deplorable what they're doing to these hardworking nurses these days. And Dr. Crush was probably Lucy's biggest support system. This is a fake name, by the way. I'm calling him Dr. Crush because it seems like Lucy and Dr. Crush had, in my opinion, workplace crushes on each other, to put it lightly. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So from the get-go, since baby Andy passed and baby Charlie passed, Dr. Crush was like right there to support Lucy. She would text him during or after her shifts to just talk about how stressful her life and her work has been. He was always very encouraging and he would support her. I'm gonna read you some of their texts and you tell me what kind of relationship you think it is, because it's very pertinent to the story later. Lucy texts Dr. Crush about how stressful work is, and she texts him, we've lost 2 babies. 2 babies I was caring for, and now this happened today. It makes me think, am I missing something? Am I even good enough? Lucy, if anyone knows how hard you've worked the past 3 days, it's me. If anybody says anything to you about not being good enough or performing adequately, I want you to promise me that you'll give my details to provide a statement. I don't care who it is, and I don't care if I have to leave the hospital. You promise? Well, I sincerely hope I won't ever be needing a statement, but thank you, I promise. So when they say statement, I don't think that they were referring to a police statement. Well, maybe not. I think that they're just referring to like a charge against her license, like people accusing her of medical neglect or malpractice.
Okay.
Right, so it's not like, oh my God, you're a serial killer, I'm gonna give them my statement to defend you. It's more like, I don't think that you're in a position where you committed medical malpractice, and I can vouch for that.
Do they work together or?
Yeah, not as often, but they do cross paths, yes, and they do work on certain patients together. And he said, you are one of the few nurses across the region, and I've pretty much worked everywhere, that I would trust with my own children.
Oh, God.
Wow.
That's wild.
She responds, I don't know what to say. Thank you. Then a little while later, Dr. Crush texts her, am I right in thinking you've had 6 long shifts? No wonder you're tired. Yeah, but it's my own fault. I have hypothyroidism, so I'm just tired all the time. Can you take your annual leave? Is there anything I can do to help? Cake? Coffee? Thanks, but no. I do think that I'm going to be going on a trip with my parents. This was right before another baby collapsed. Baby Noah. Lucy was on shift for that. Which, side note, Dr. Crush got off work and left for maybe about 15-20 minutes before he comes back with a surprise for Lucy, and it's a box of chocolates. He texts her after, oh, Lucy, you poor little thing. Have a cry. It'll make you feel better. You can take my car home if you're too tired. I'll arrange to get it in the morning. So sorry you've had a rubbish day. You really deserve a vacation after this horrible week. So that's exactly what she does. She goes on vacation to Ibiza.
I bet you no baby
He's
died.
a baby
No,
Noah?
Yeah.
I bet you no baby died. No baby died.
Holy, that's...
Yeah.
All them babies good.
There were a
Honey,
few
Andy,
surviving
when she was away on
babies.
vacation.
But what's crazy is it's
No
not
baby
just baby
died.
A through Q. There's actually a lot of parents who Nurse Lucy was assigned to their baby, and thankfully their baby wasn't in the NICU, but they still had some sort of health problems while they were at Chester. So we really don't know how many. Anyway, she went to Ibiza, she stayed there for 2 weeks, and the day that she got back, another baby entered into critical condition. Baby Oliver was a perfectly healthy baby, but the day after Nurse Lucy got back on shift, he mysteriously and suddenly had a crisis. He was vomiting, his stomach was super swollen, his dad said he looked like E.T. and his veins were bright blue. After Oliver passed, Lucy texted her coworker. Oliver was doing just fine, but he got a huge tummy overnight and it ballooned. There was nothing else that led to the collapse. I wish I was still on vacation. Then she texted with Dr. Crush some more about how sad she was and how hard her job was. Now this is what's so depressing. Oliver was actually one of triplets. Identical sons. So he had 2 other brothers. They were all in the NICU. Oliver passed, and less than 24 hours later, his brother Peter passed away. And I'm just like thinking of the trauma of the parents, okay? So Nurse Lucy was in the room, even though she wasn't supposed to be looking after Peter. And it's weird, isn't it? Like when you really sit down and you think about it, it makes you want to raise your eyebrows at Lucy. Look, I imagine in the beginning, almost every single nurse was on Nurse Lucy's side because that's terrifying. Being a nurse, you've worked your ass off. You feel this intense grief every time a patient passes. It's not a field for the weak. You're overstaffed. You're underfunded. And now one of your own is being accused of being so negligent to the point of causing deaths in infants or going out of their way to kill infants. Every nurse probably had Nurse Lucy's back in the beginning. Because it's the feeling of, if that could happen to her, it could happen to me. I could just be accused. But one by one, the nurses had to ask themselves, is Nurse Lucy really innocent? There was a really creepy instance, okay? So I'm going to bring it back to baby Diana. Baby Diana was in the NICU when her condition suddenly worsened and she passed. It was devastating for Diana's mom in every way possible. She had gone through 60 hours of labor. And now baby Diana was gone.
16.
They were spending their last moment with Diana to say their goodbyes, and this is the part that's so unsettling. Nurse Lucy wasn't even in charge of baby Diana, but she was hovering around the parents as they said goodbye, asking them constantly, do you need any water? Do you need anything? Do you need this? They just wanted some time alone. And she's just hovering. It was to the point where Diana's parents took the nurse that was actually in charge of Diana and said, can you please tell that nurse over there to, leave us alone? That nurse talked to Lucy about it. But it was just one of those things where she couldn't stop thinking about everything else that had happened. And it just felt unsettling. So she told a few of the other nurses about what happened. And one of the coworkers was like, oh my God, the same thing happened to baby Charlie. When baby Charlie was in critical condition, doctors knew that there was nothing more that they could do. Parents requested life-saving attempts to be stopped so that they could spend a little bit of time with Charlie, have him baptized by the hospital priest, and spend time with him, right? Well, Lucy went in with a ventilated box. Basically a box, like a coffin, if you will. It didn't look like a coffin, but it's essentially a coffin. And asked if they wanted to put baby Charlie in there. Well, they're spending time. Like, everyone else was under the impression, when they're ready, they'll let us know they're ready. But she barges in there and is like, do you want to put the baby in here? The parents were horrified. Like, this is so traumatic. Imagine you are dealing with so much trauma, so much emotion. You're spending your last moments alone. Your baby is technically still alive. Your baby will die, but right at this moment, they're still alive, and a nurse comes in with basically a box and is like, you want to put your baby in here? It just felt really unsettling. Like, it didn't feel helpful. It felt weird. So they talked to their nurse, and that nurse had to talk to Lucy, and Lucy didn't think so, okay? She didn't think she was being weird. She texted her coworker, I was just trying to be considerate. Why do things like this always happen to me? So now the other nurses, they're getting fed up with all these little weird moments, and one of them thinks, you know what, I'm just gonna freaking text her. I'm gonna text Lucy, see her thoughts on the matter. So she texts, hey Lucy, there's something odd about that night and the other 3 infants that went so suddenly. And Lucy goes, what do you mean, odd? We lost 3 and in different circumstances. I don't know. Were they that different? Ignore me. I'm just speculating. I think that this is weird. And I don't know. Maybe some people are just not as conspiracy theorists like I am. But I feel like if I was a nurse and these babies were dying, I would engage in this conversation.
No way.
I would say, yeah, why have there been so many babies that have been passing recently? Like, you think that the hospital executives are missing something? Like, you think the doctors have done something? Like, what's going on, you think?
You're saying Lucy's response was really odd, right?
She was just like, what do you mean odd? They all died in different circumstances.
Yeah.
But I would be like, yeah, okay, now that you mention it, yeah, that's a lot. I don't know what's going on. Because every nurse feels different. So the way that Lucy responded, it just didn't sit well with the nurses. And then it happened again. So baby Elliot had blood coming out of his nose and mouth. Doctors and nurses immediately rushed in and tried to give Elliot life-saving measures. But baby Elliot stopped moving, stopped crying. They couldn't bring him back. His mom, Elliot's mom, was in the room watching the entire thing, and Nurse Lucy was one of the nurses that came in to help and try and save Elliot. So after he's gone, most of the hospital staff, they shuffle out, not because they don't want to be there, but they want to give Elliot's parents some time alone with Elliot. Lucy stays behind and offers to give Elliot a bath. His mom agreed since he had been bleeding, and I don't think the parents wanted to see him with blood on his body any longer. And Lucy brought out the tub, washed off Elliot's body, and Elliot's mom said, Lucy let me bathed him in front of me in the neonatal unit. After he was bathed, he was placed in a white gown, and I just remember being so thankful because we had no clothes for him because he was so little. But just like the twins from the beginning of today's case, Elliot's parents couldn't even go home to grieve because Elliot's twin Freddie was also in the NICU, and his heart rate was too high. His blood sugar was way too low.
How evil do you need to be after you kill one of them and you see what the parents are going through and then you do that again?
Yeah, that's why I'm saying she's like a grief vampire. It's like she gets off on the grief. That's the only way in my head I can explain even the hovering around the parents as they grieve. It's like she's soaking in grief and it's like energizing her, or like it's an addiction. It's just so sick.
Yeah, she's feeding off others' pain.
Yeah, which is, I really don't know what kind of person that would have to be, because most people are generally very uncomfortable when they are confronted with such strong grief. Either they feel that grief rub off on them and that makes them uncomfortable, or they don't know how to respond in a way that can help that person, so it makes them uncomfortable. This is like just so against human nature. So Lucy was taking care of Freddie's blood sugar levels when it happened. The doctors tried to give him sugar water to try and help. Lucy texted one of the other nurses on shift, did you see what his blood sugar was? 1.8. Both nurses chatted for a while about how they hoped Freddie would get better. And then Lucy said, I'm off soon. Would you give me an update later tonight on how Freddie's doing? So after work, Lucy would go to these salsa classes, and then she got a text. Oh, Freddie's more stable now. They're doing tests to find out what happened. Good. No response. Lucy texts back 3 hours later. I wonder if it's like a different sort of problem, like a hormone problem. I hope they can get to the bottom of it. A lot of people think that this is her trying to come up with answers since her attempt at killing him didn't work.
Do we know how every baby go through? Okay.
Yeah, so we do know it's... See, the part that gets tricky is I almost want to say allegedly, and that's not me saying that this crime is up for debate or it didn't happen or Lucy's not the culprit. But I want to say allegedly because prosecutors can only speculate how she did things based on the evidence. But since there were no eyewitnesses and no CCTV cameras, it's just one of those things, right? Prosecutors believe that she did it in some really sick and twisted ways. Sometimes her favorite thing was to inject air bubbles into the babies.
No. I don't know, man. Really, no. I'm fighting every day. Every time.
You know how when you get a shot, they make sure that there's no air in there, right? So an air bubble, like when you're talking about skin, it's fine usually, but when you're going into the vein, into like the bloodstream, air is absolutely not okay. Air bubbles in adults, full-grown adults, can kill them because that air bubble doesn't just disappear somewhere. It stays there, and if it blocks blood from going into your heart or to your brain, you could have a stroke, you could die. And just think about how tiny the blood vessels for these infants are. They're not even like 4 pounds. So air bubbles, they can kill adult beings. Think about what they can do to a newborn baby. Then if sometimes she didn't feel like doing that, she would inject air into their stomachs via their feeding tubes, and it would cause their stomachs to balloon, and that's why one of the fathers said he looked like E.T. And that can really crush like their diaphragm and all these other things so that they can't breathe. There was evidence of physical assault in some cases. They believe that she would take medical instruments and/or tools. She would take the feeding tube and jam the feeding tube directly into the throats of the babies, and that's why some of them were bleeding from the nose and the mouth. One of the babies had liver damage that was so intense that doctors said they only saw that type of liver damage in children who had been in very bad car accidents. Sometimes she would just add a ton of insulin to their feeding tubes as well, killing them. And it does seem like sometimes she would just literally take out their breathing tubes.
Wow. It almost sounds like she's like trying whatever she can think of on these babies.
Yeah.
And then I imagine sometimes if someone survives, she probably will try something else on the next baby.
Yeah. And like, okay, I really don't like to relate cases to my personal life because I feel like there's nothing in my personal life where I've dealt with that can in any shape, way, or form compare to the grief that a lot of these victims and their families have felt. But we recently went through something with my sister where my niece was in the PICU. She coded multiple times. Her heart stopped multiple times. So like the trauma that has left on our family, especially my sister and her husband, even now, tiny little things trigger her trauma. And to see my sister in that level of pain, and Mia survived, thankfully. So it's just like, I can't even begin to amount how raw and visceral this pain must feel for the parents. Thankfully, Freddie survived, and the doctors, they chalked it up to an imbalance in insulin in his body. Weeks later, Dr. B would find out the truth. He would be in his office again, looking over paperwork, when he found something interesting. Baby Freddie's insulin levels were high, but his C-peptide levels were not high. So think of insulin and C-peptide like a couple in a honeymoon stage. They don't go anywhere without each other. So if your body is producing too much insulin, then the C-peptide levels are going to be very high as well. If the body is low on insulin, the C-peptides are low. It's just naturally like that. But Freddie's C-peptides did not match his insulin levels, which means that his body is not creating excess insulin. So are you catching my drift? That means the insulin must have come from an outside source. Then Dr. B looked at who was in charge of Freddie's last feedings, and he only saw 2 people in charge, or 2 shifts that were in charge of his feedings. Nurse Lucy was the one that gave him his feedings both times. Yeah. So his very strong scientific belief was someone put insulin inside of baby Freddie's feeding bag. Every other nurse said that they didn't do that. Lucy denied it too, but just with all these other coincidences, it's not looking good. And then remember the triplets where Oliver and then his brother Peter died? Mm-hmm. Before Peter passed, he was in critical condition, and another nurse remembered checking up on Peter, and Lucy said out of nowhere, "He's not gonna make it out here alive, is he?" If you know anything about nurses, they never say stuff like that. It's such a dirty, dirty feeling. Like, why jinx a life, especially an infant life, out of all things? That's why there's a superstition that they don't even say, "It's a slow night, isn't it?" Because that means all hell is about to break loose in the hospital, and usually all hell breaks loose means someone might die. So the nurse scolded Lucy because at this point, Peter had been stable for like a second, okay? I mean, he's not doing great, but he was kind of getting stable. And she said, "What are you saying? Don't say that." But then a couple hours later, his abdomen swelled again, and he got this purplish rash that looked like spiderweb veins all over his body, and he wasn't responding to life-saving measures. And it wasn't until after Peter's death the nurse felt her hair kind of stand up on the back of her neck, and she just had these goosebumps, and it was like deja vu. She remembered just a year ago when baby Charlie wasn't doing well. He was stable, but he wasn't doing well. Nurse Lucy was helping monitor Charlie, and she looked over at this nurse and said, "I don't think he's gonna make it out alive." And she remembered how gross it made her feel because, like, again, why would you jinx that? But then she also remembered so vividly how Charlie would not make it out alive. And now neither would baby Peter. And now whenever smiling, happy Lucy walked by, all the nurse could see was just this thick black cloud, like a bad omen. But Lucy would be busy texting her colleagues. I keep thinking of them in the cot together. Oliver and Peter. They were together, yeah, at one point. So peaceful, yet beyond words for how awful it is. So sad. The family all thanked me when I took baby Peter and dressed him. 2 of the 3 triplets died, and Dr. B was going insane. The hospital executives still refused to believe that a nurse could be involved. Mainly, they were concerned that this rumor was false and Lucy was going to sue the hospital. I'm just going to give you an example about how big this fear was for them. Dr. B sent an email to one of the executives after baby Peter died, and he said, "We still need to talk about Lucy. I believe we need help from outside agencies. At the moment, we're all under suspicion, and the only agency who can investigate every single one of us, I believe, is the police. I think we should proactively seek their help." The executives responded, "Action is being taken. All emails cease forthwith." Basically, don't be emailing that because this could come up in a lawsuit. Don't be emailing Lucy's name because if she sues us, this could be discoverable in a lawsuit. But 4 doctors, Dr. B, the head of the neonatal unit, Dr. J, the one that walked in on Lucy acting busy, and 2 other doctors, they refused to back down. The hospital executives, they even try to put their own minds at ease by calling the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health. So this is in the UK, hence the Royal College, right? Executives asked them, review the services that are being provided in the NICU unit. According to some nurses, Lucy seemed a little bit uneasy when they were investigating. And they said that for whatever reason, when anyone outside the hospital, even if they called like an ENT specialist for the babies, Nurse Lucy would look around several times and just constantly ask, like, who are these people? Who are these people? It just seemed odd. So after the review, all of the documents were sent off to a specialist in London, and she said at least 4 of the infant deaths should be investigated by authorities. But the hospital still didn't do anything. They had another meeting in January of 2017 and just taking their sweet time. They said, the results show that the problems in the neonatal units are issues that have to deal with leadership and timely intervention. AKA, we're not going to the cops about it. We would rather just stop accepting premature babies. That's what they say. Let's stop accepting premature babies. We'll still do labor and delivery, but no more premature babies and no more NICU for a while. They also moved Lucy to an administrative job in probably the worst department that they could have put her in. The Risk and Patient Safety Office. It's like so ironic, no?
Yeah.
But at least she didn't have access to the babies anymore.
Okay.
But it's just crazy how much the executives were worried about a lawsuit. At this point, you might imagine that Lucy comes from the royal family themselves and they all work for her. Because a few weeks after shutting down the NICU, the hospital CEO personally went to Lucy's father's house and apologized to Lucy and her father about the rumors and accusations she was facing.
Wow, how ironic, dude. Like, this is unbelievable.
Yeah, he came back and advised the other board members of the hospital to apologize to Lucy as well. They even tried to get the 4 doctors, they're called the Gang of 4 in the UK.
This is like the Black Mirror episode.
Which one?
Just like any.
Oh, yeah,
Just
yeah.
the irony of this.
Yeah, like they're more scared of a lawsuit than infants dying.
Yeah, meanwhile, they're apologizing to a killer. Please, please.
They tried to get the 4 doctors to send an email to Lucy, and they wanted it to read, "The increased mortality rate in the NICU unit has been a stressful time for all of us, and we understand that it has been exceptionally stressful for you. We would like to apologize for any inappropriate comments that have been made during this difficult period. As you are aware, emotions run high. We are very sorry for the stress and upset that you have experienced this past year. Please be assured that patient safety is our top priority during this difficult time." The doctors were like, you can keep your letter and we're going to go to the authorities, okay? So that's how Operation Hummingbird began. Officer Jones sitting in his office at the police station, and he's looking up at these 2 doctors sitting in front of him, still in their white coats, and they're fidgeting. They seem super nervous. The hospital isn't thrilled about us doing this, and we didn't want to make a big fuss, but we think a third-party organization needs to handle this case. So the doctors are saying, basically, we want you to look into us too. Look into every single person in this unit because we don't know what's going on. We have our suspicions, but we need to stop this. Babies are dying. And he explains, we usually lose maybe 2 to 3 babies a year, max probably 4 in the past history of our hospital. But this year alone, we've lost 7, and many, many more had close calls. Okay, and how can we help you with that? They're like, we don't think that these deaths have been natural. There's a nurse that has worked every single shift that someone has died or had almost come close to dying. They're like, well, do you have proof? So they gather all of these medical documents and all the shift charts from the past year, and they gave it all to the police. The investigation would take 1 year. They would have to pull medical records, shift charts. They would go to eyewitnesses, nurses. They talked to doctors, nurses, families, everyone. And finally, July 3rd of 2018, Lucy was arrested the first time. Should actually be arrested like 3 times.
What?
Yeah, the whole ordeal was pretty anticlimactic. We do have some body cam footage, but I mean, Lucy looks vaguely confused. It's hard to say whether or not she's faking the confusion, but I thought the reaction was telling, okay? Just like put your mind in that position for 1 second, okay? If there were cops at my door, and I know that there have been rumors about me killing babies, that is like one of the worst crimes to be accused of, right? Especially if my profession is saving babies. I would just feel the highest sense of injustice. And they come knocking on my door, you better believe I'm not fighting them. I'm not trying to be argumentative, but I would be screaming and pleading with them like, you don't understand. I would never, like, I feel like there would be something inside me that's like, the words would be flowing out like, you don't understand, like, this is not what you think.
Right, I would never.
You don't think so? Like, that feels like more of a normal, appropriate reaction.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. She's really chill. She looks kind of confused, but she just like follows them. The only thing she really says is like, oh, I had knee surgery. And I think she mentions it as a way to explain why she's moving slow into the patrol car. But that's really all she says. We do have to
Take a seat in there for me, Lucy. I'll move that seat forward a bit. Sure. Yeah, I just had knee surgery. Oh, right, okay.
We do have some footage of what happened inside the interrogation room, but not all of that has been released to the public. It's very short, what we have, and the clip starts off with Lucy talking. She's got her hands in her lap, and her elbows are hugged close to her body. She's not moving a lot. She's very calm. She's not very defensive. She's not saying everything that her mind thinks of. She just says, they told me that there had been a lot of deaths, and that I've been linked to someone who was there for a lot of them. And again, I feel like my reaction would be, like, please talk to everyone that's ever worked with me in the past. Like, I would never do this. Like, please, like, you don't understand. Like, I'm on every single shift. Like, I feel like I don't know, who knows? Maybe in the rest of the interrogation it went like that, but this was just eerily calm for me. They asked, did you have any concerns that there was a rise in the mortality rates? Yes. So tell me about that. What concerns did you have? I think we all just noticed as a team in general, the nursing staff, that this was a rise compared to previous years.
Did you have any concerns that there was a rise in the mortality rate? Yes. Okay, so tell me about that. What concerns did you have? You don't just know, just as a team in general, this and stuff. This was as compared to previous years.
The police didn't get much out of Lucy during the interrogation, but they did have a warrant to search her home, and they found lots of crazy things in there. So let's go over the craziest parts. We talked about the notes with Dr. Crush's name and hearts all over them. Yeah, that was alarming. The nursery, that was alarming. There was also some other notes that I'll go over in length. But one thing is, Lucy still maintains this narrative to this day that she is innocent and that she was a scapegoat for the hospital. So just keep that in the back of your mind while I tell you everything that they found in her home. Medical documents. When authorities searched her home, they found multiple sheets of medical records for more than one baby that passed. This is super illegal. Nobody is allowed to take home patient records. Nobody is allowed to take home strictly imagine all the violations. Just because you're my nurse, you can have all my medical documents hidden under your bed, because that's where it was hidden. It was hidden under Lucy's bed. Yeah, like, I don't think so. I would be very uncomfortable if my doctor had my medical records under their bed, or my nurse. Even if the patient is just a baby, even if the patient has passed, you can't just take home these records. Authorities believe that these were her trophies. You know how serial killers bring something from the victim or the crime scene, something to remember each kill by? They think that this was Lucy Letby's trophy stash. They said it was hidden under her bed. It was almost like a sacred place because even her bank documents weren't even under her bed. Like things that most people would typically prioritize more than like random scraps of papers from work. Because that's how she tries to claim. She's like, oh, I must have accidentally had them in my pocket and then brought them home and then never got rid of them. But she actually moved houses in late 2015, so that means she also brought them to her new house and then forgot to throw them away. When she was confronted with that, she just said, oh, I just like to collect paper. Like, I'm kind of a hoarder. It's not because I'm, like, looking up the families on Facebook, because that's what she was doing.
Wow. Oh.
I don't know how she was able to try and even look the investigators in the face and argue this, but Lucy Letby looked up a lot of the parents of the baby's victims on Facebook, and this is the disturbing part, okay? This is why I keep thinking of grief vampire while I'm researching this case. I just keep thinking of like this image of someone who gets off on people's grief, like someone just standing at a funeral, like soaking in all this energy. She would do this around baby death anniversaries for these victims, because parents will usually post like, it's been 1 year without you, it's been 2 years. It's a moment of grief and reflection and love and all these complicated emotions, and during the holidays, which is another moment for families to reflect and talk about these types of things. She would look up the parents every so often on Facebook. And when I say every so often, that sounds like once or twice a year. In 1 year, it was like 2,300 something times that she looked at parents of the victims.
How many times?
2,300 something times.
1 year?
In 1 year.
There's 365 days.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like 4 times a day.
I mean, she claims that she just remembers these patients and wanted to see how they're doing just because she's a caring nurse, but I don't know, 200, 3,080 times in a single year is just unhinged behavior in my very personal, non-professional, very free advice and opinion. That is unhinged behavior. Yeah. That's not even the most damning thing found in her house. The notes. Lucy was an avid note taker. She kept a diary, a planner, and she wrote a lot of sticky notes, and she never threw away any of it. Another slightly unsettling detail, at least for me, was that her diary was just super, super meticulously organized, like color-coded with different colored asterisks. She had some sort of meaning behind every color. Every different code was something. Authorities believe that the highlighted dates in her diary were significant events that were related to her crimes. The contents of her diary have not been released to the public, but her little notebook scraps, her journaling scraps, sticky notes, they were released, a few of them. Another unsettling thing, they're not that easy to read, not in the sense that her handwriting was messy, but okay, so sometimes she writes left to right while she's writing, but then she'll go in and fill over the leftover spaces in between the words she's already written. Or on top, like, you know how there's lines? She'll write in between the lines a whole nother thought. Sometimes she writes words on top of words, so it's kind of difficult to pick up her whole coherent train of thought. But one sticky note that has made its rounds on the internet has been decoded, and it reads in full, I am evil, I did this. There are no words, I'm an awful person. I pay every day for that. I can't breathe, I can't focus. Kill myself right now. Overwhelming fear, panic. I'll never have children or marry. I'll never know what it's like to have a family. No help. I've not done anything wrong. Police investigation, slander, discrimination, victimization, all too much. All taking over my life. I feel very alone and scared. What does the future hold? How can I get through it? How will things ever be like they used to? I don't deserve to live. I did this. Why me? I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough for them. I'm a horrible